Good morning and welcome to the pre-agenda interview for Thursday, May 18th, 2023. Madam Clerk.
Bill 1514, resolution appointing Larry Scarato as Chief of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, Department of Public Safety.
Thank you. And today we're joined by Councilman Kraus, who was previously the chairperson for Public Safety, Councilwoman Strasburger, and Councilwoman Warwick. And Acting Chief, I'm going to give you an opportunity to say a few words, open with a few words, and then we'll allow the council members to ask questions. You can respond if they say you can respond, and if not, at the end of the meeting, I'll give you a chance for something you feel like you need to clarify. I'll give you that opportunity to clarify any statements at the end of the interviews. Okay?
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you and what I know is one of the biggest decisions in the recent history for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and that's selecting the new chief. So I look forward to participating in the process. The level of transparency that the Bureau demands, that our communities deserve, is important, and I think that's why this interview process is important to be shared publicly with our community, with our department, and with your constituents. So I welcome any and all questions. Be as forthright as I can about all the answers and look forward to talking to you.
Thank you. And I also want to mention that we are also joined by Councilwoman Gross online. Councilman Kraus.
May I?
Please.
Thank you, Madam President. So good morning, Acting Chief Scarato.
Good morning.
It's nice to have you here.
Thanks.
And it's nice to have sort of the uncertainty of who might be leading the Bureau coming to conclusion. So my first question for you is really rather broad in scope, but we talked a little bit offline before we came on, and I was curious about your thoughts about what a modern day department looks like post-COVID, post George Floyd's murder, and what your thoughts are about, we talked a little bit about how the world has kind of gone off the rails in the last couple of years, and so I'm just curious if you could talk in somewhat broad terms what your thoughts are about what a modern department looks like and what your plans are to lead at a difficult time.
So a modern day police department, I believe, is the expectation of accountability, transparency. Oftentimes prior to, in the past, historically, policing has been very insular in its engagement. It's been very insular in its strategies, and it wasn't very receptive to outside influence, outside inputs, as we develop strategic goals, as we develop our plans of action. And today, post George Floyd, post-pandemic, the demand for accountability and inclusion for our communities to be involved in our processes is higher, is more expected than ever in the past. And we have to meet that challenge. And in that, when I talk about community police partnerships, we have been getting that wrong for 200 years. We've had the blueprint to do it and do it right. And every time we had an opportunity, I don't know if we've hit that benchmark. So that is the objective moving forward today, is that we will be a true community police partnership. And that, so Robert Peel talks about it, 1827. The community is the police are the community. And in that, if you believe in that, then it's simple as that this is a genuine partnership built outside of times of crisis that fosters trust, fosters cooperation, and welcomes that level of engagement, welcomes that input and influence from our communities to create a safer environment for all of Pittsburgh. And so that's the challenge moving forward, but that's also a commitment. So that challenge is an opportunity. And in that opportunity, we have a chance to create and be the gold star in policing as it comes to community police partnerships.
So tell me about that. Tell me some strategies that you think are effective that you can bring to help foster the change.
So first, it has to be the genetic commitment of an organization, the DNA of how we exist, right? That oftentimes we would create community-oriented police officer groups for responsibility of a select few. I believe it's the responsibility of all 900 men and women that are a member of this Bureau to be community-oriented, community-engaged. So you talk simple things like being accessible and available. So we have sectors. You talk about sector integrity, knowing your areas of patrol, so that, while we can't have and won't have officers walking foot patrol as a primary responsibility, having them out of the car within the neighborhoods that they have area responsibility over is important. And that was where they start developing partnerships, trusting relationships, ownership to problems that affect our communities. And if you commit to that level of partnership, that level of engagement, then you start to build true community police partnerships.
It's I say this all the time, constantly, and Council President and I have these conversations about the most important part of the work that we do is the relationships that we build. Regardless of a circumstance perhaps outside of our control that doesn't assist us with accomplishing the goals we set for ourselves. The ability to build relationships helps to bridge that, does it not? And the key of trust at a time when not just our department by any means, but just policing in general across the board, there is this a mistrust that I don't know has ever existed before. And I think what you say is truer today than it has ever been.
I agree. If you are trying to build trust during times of crisis, you have failed. Right, so we are building trust out in our everyday engagement so that we are able to survive the crisis, which it will invariably occur. And that is the objective, is that we're building trust, we're building relationships, we're showing true commitment to partnerships outside of those crises. And in that, I believe when we talk about trusting or communities trusting police, it's not about the trust of our officers stealing somebody's wallet. It's about the community's trust that we believe we will keep them safe. And if we fail there, that is catastrophic to any police organization, any community, any city. And so I look at that and say failure is not an option in that regard. It's a commitment that is worthwhile moving forward, and more importantly, it should be demanded. It's been demanded for 200 years. We just haven't got it right.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I agree with that. In the previous administration, when Mayor Peduto was still here, and we were going through the difficult time of the murder of George Floyd, at the protest in the street, and the unrest that was happening, and the then mayor commissioned his report on what policing is going to look like today. And so for about 17, 18 weeks, I spent every Monday morning on Zoom, but in the Hilltop, speaking specifically with constituencies of color about what their thoughts were about what a police department should look like today. And what I heard time and time again was defund police is an absolute fallacy, that we won't go anywhere near anything like that. And that number two, it's not about policing, it's about protecting and serving. And that there was a clear distinction made in every conversation that we had of a community feeling they were being policed and not protected and served. Do you understand?
Where you go?
Can you talk a little bit about the differentiation between the two of those and how we create a department, like you said, building relationships, building trust, that we truly are a partnership, we are in this together, we are, we're as good as we are with each other. Right. So how do you see a department being a department that protects and serves?
Two styles, right? And I think there's two words that are very clear distinctions of that style of police. Guardian, warrior, right? And for decades we talked about and discussed war on crime, war against gangs, war against violence. But when we're on drugs, right? When should a police department ever be at war with its community? Never, right? We're not a warrior. We're not in a foreign country. We are guardians of our community, and it's in that challenge is to care for our communities, to do no harm in our communities. And if we believe that that is our role, and not that I'm putting 900 men and women into a warrior mentality, then we create an environment that is looking out for our community, right? And all those that live within it. And that's a philosophy. And so I challenge policing of the past, to get away from the warrior mindset, because it's not beneficial, and it will always have disparate impacts on communities of color. But it also affects our other communities as well. So it's a philosophical movement in believing that we are guardians and we're not warriors, getting out of that mindset that we put our officers at war with X, whatever that variable is, isn't and shouldn't be the vision or mission of the Bureau of Police.
So when the conversation first showed that police had a desire to live outside the city, I was, myself and Councilman Burgess were both asked to be witnesses, if you will, to what we thought would not be a good outcome of police living outside the city. And something that Councilman Burgess said that has always stuck with me is that when officers live outside of the city and police inside then the city, it becomes more of an occupying force. Now that's very strong terminology. I get that. And I'm not trying to make it bigger than what it is. And having said that, the decisions have been made, and officers do have the right to live outside the city. So having that sort of component now within a bureau, your thoughts again, if you can, how do we can we recruit a force that sees the wealth and the health of living in the city and the benefit that it brings to actually being members of the community, like you're saying, we're in this together. So do you have just, in any way that you can, do you have thoughts about that?
So I think whenever that was awarded to the officers, obviously it then creates an environment where officers aren't visible at youth sports, officers aren't shopping in city stores, officers aren't living in the neighborhoods in which we patrol. So first and foremost, then you need to be far more intentional about community engagement. You need to be far more intentional about access and availability of our officers while they are here, so that they don't feel like occupying forces that are just coming to the city to work, and they don't have any invested interest in all of the dynamics of city living. I am a city person. I've always been a city person, but that's me. And my lifestyle is a lot different than others.
Tell them where.
What's that?
Tell them
Mount
where.
Washington, Madam President's district. Still in land there. Probably going to build a house in Mount Washington again.
Just had to put that out there a little bit.
Yes. So in that, I think you start talking about, maybe then we transition to how do you attract those that would want to stay, and just having a recruiting effort led by the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police that focuses on city residents. We spoke about this earlier. We give 5 points for the Pittsburgh Promise, for a person being a member of the Pittsburgh Promise. We give 3 points for a person having a graduated from or participated, I believe it's graduated from a city university. It's 8 points. And I know they're not collective, but that's half of what veterans preference points are. So focusing a targeted recruitment effort on city residents that have city values and have city commitments. And in that, I think we've given a level of preference based on those points that we can attract those that live within the city. And oftentimes when you do that, those will be the same candidates that, or officers that we hire that want to reside here.
Can we go above and beyond that? Is there anything else you can think that is possibility, or ways that perhaps maybe this council might be able to assist, whether it's legislatively or through budget or finance, that we can assist and encourage members of the community to want to be here, live here, and join our force?
I mean, there are some police departments in America that have housing incentives for those that reside within the city.
I love that.
There are at one point, I remember when I was younger, 20-something years ago, that there was, in some of our neighborhoods that were HUD funded, that they would support some stipend for police officers to live in those homes. So I think there's opportunities if we're creative in that regard. And in the interim, or as we move forward, we still continue to focus our recruiting efforts on city potential candidates or city candidates for potential hire.
When I first came in, I chaired the Public Safety Committee for, I think, the first 2 years or so I was here, and I remember that being a very distinct conversation about how we could build relationships or partnerships with our financial institutions here to create incentive for reduced mortgage or some kind of a financial settlement for purchasing a home and being here in Pittsburgh. And I still really like that, and I think that really has potential, something that we could clearly pursue. Can we talk a little bit about recruitment? I'm not going to say this again, but it's like the world went off the rails after COVID, and God willing, it's going to return one day. I hope so, but it's a difficult time, just at least in the perception in the public, to be a police officer. And I've never known a time. And I came to age in the 60s, and I don't know that I've ever seen a time when there was such a level of disrespect for law enforcement, just trying to do the job that we all asked them to do, which is an incredibly difficult job that you could not ever pay me to do. So in light of a crazy kind of world, how do we begin recruitment at the earliest and best time to plant the seed early for people to really want, across all demographics, right, to want to be part of our department and stay here and make that a career?
I think police, specifically the Bureau, does an exceptional job engaging youth. When I say youth, I mean like 12 and under. But our target population for recruitment is that 14 to 18 going into college, 14 to 22. If we're talking about building or planting these seeds, is that we've got to be more committed in that engagement. So whether it's a police athletic league, whether it's an explorers program, but that we're creating channels, pathways for our young people to engage early in that formidable, to your point, in that formidable time in their maturity, in their development, that they're seeing police in a positive light. And in that, I think if you create those pathways, you will then develop career tracks for those that are from city schools, our neighborhoods. You start creating pathways for those that in that engagement of positive interaction with police officers in those formidable years, I think matters. And if you do that, and we don't do that right now, and unfortunately, we don't have any recruiting strategy today. That is handled by human resources, and they do an excellent job, but their job wasn't or shouldn't be to recruit for police. And in that, it's our responsibility to seek those interested in our profession and then highlight and champion why working for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police is a career that those members of our community should choose. So that's our responsibility, and we have failed there. And in that failure, we don't have the adequate representation in any of our communities that engages in a meaningful way to ensure or attract those that would be remotely interested in this profession. And so that's a commitment that is of equal priority to me as any of the others, because it will matter in our ability to attract, it will matter in our ability to retain. And if we don't have a strategy, then we're going to be left just in the wind without candidates, and we'll continue to hemorrhage candidates to suburban police departments, and that's not acceptable.
So you said the magic word, retention. Can we talk a little bit about retention and how we can entice officers to find that capacity within themselves to want to stay, even in difficult times when we know other departments pay better and the workload is less and all the things that we already know? What kind of morale, what kind of incentives can we create to foster retention and have our men and women stay here?
So oftentimes, money seems to be the end-all, be-all, and I would challenge you, it's not. They do have to find value in what we do and where you do it. And in that, I need to be an advocate for our officers, and in that, I need to provide an environment that appears and is equitable for all of our officers. I joined the city, I understood that...
When did you join the city? How
1995.
long? Okay.
So when I came to the city, I understood that there were better paying departments in the surrounding Allegheny County, but there weren't any other departments that offered the diversity that this organization would offer. You didn't. I worked canine. I was a motor sergeant. I worked in narcotics. I worked gang violence. I worked in sex crimes. That's just some of the things that I did. So that opportunity to work in a city that gave you so many dynamic choices in your career. And that's the things that we have to champion as an attraction. But it's got to, and they've got to believe, our officers got to believe it's fair and equitable. And that you have, if you do your job and you do it well, you'll have an opportunity to achieve all of these different things. And, we have now with the new contract, we have become very competitive in our salaries. And when you compare us to cities of similar size, we are competitive to Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus. So in that, I think we've created a competitive environment, and now we talk about wellness and valuing and respecting our officers on a daily basis, and we show them. And when we show them, I think then you start to create an environment that will improve on retention. Will there be those that leave? Certainly. There are some that are just coming here because of the fact that we pay for you to go to the police academy. And maybe their intention was never to stay here long term. And you have the opportunity to retire in 20 years. And maybe that and be young. So when I retired at 43. And it gave me an opportunity to start a whole nother career. And so we just have to plan for those to be the outcomes. And in that, I think we'll be able to retain our brightest and best.
So, it's a matter of public record. You and I have had time where we've worked together. You were zone commander in 3 when I first came in to council. But even I don't know until you started talking right now just the extensive resume you have within the department. I think that's important to kind of put out there. Would you like to talk a little bit more about just how extensive your resume in the department is and how that empowers you to lead a department?
Right. So, if I talk to every position, so I was, I started in 1995. My first assignment was the North Side, which I love the North Side. So, I love yours.
He loves the South Side.
My first house was in Voss Camp Heights. Right, so that was my assignment. I was there until I was elevated to plainclothes detective in the zone, and then from there I transferred to K9. I stayed in K9 till I was going to be promoted to sergeant. Went to internal affairs. I worked there for about 6 months. Got promoted to sergeant. Went back into patrol operations in the Hill. There I oversaw the zone and traffic. So I was part-time zone, part-time traffic, so I got my Class M motorcycle license, and I rode on the motors. I thought it was very important to, if I'm going to oversee a unit, to have familiarity, not just casual familiarity, but the ability to do what they do. And so I went and learned how to ride a Harley Davidson for 6 or so months, and then from there I got assigned to our gang violence unit, was the street response unit as a sergeant. I stayed there until there was an opportunity to move to sex assault, family crisis as a sergeant. And a lot of my career up to that point was to build whatever, I believe to be always a creative thinker. I thought outside the box in pretty much everything I do. And that's the way I believe you get great accomplishments done, you achieve great things, is that you're not confined. And I think people trusted that I would build whatever unit I was in better than when I got there. So I was in sex assault for a period of time. I was not only the supervisor, I was also an investigator. I did interrogations, and then I had the opportunity to get promoted to lieutenant. I went to Northside for a brief period of time and then transferred to Zone 3, where you and I were liaising on many projects. In that time, Commander McNeely was nearing retirement. I got the opportunity to be mentored by her, and which was
an amazing mentor.
Amazing mentor. Yeah. Amazing mentor. She was actually, coincidentally, my first commander in the North Side. So tremendous influence, tremendous impact on my career. And it gave me an opportunity to sit in the commander's chair as a lieutenant and learn. And then given the opportunity under Chief McClay to become commander, I remained at Zone 3 for a short period of time, well, I guess almost 6 or 7 months. So I'd been there probably 18 months at that point. And then we were talking about violent crime strategy. So I was transferred to lead our major crimes, which then was to to stand up the group violence intervention strategy and what violent crime reduction would look like as a new approach. So we redesigned the way in which homicides were investigated, which non-fatal shootings were investigated. We created the violent crime unit and started consolidating some of our other units, robbery, members of burglary, some of sex assault, to create what at the time I got there was, I believe, 16 detectives investigating shootings and murders to 32, and an entire dedicated team that does that. And then shortly thereafter, Chief McClay promoted me to Assistant Chief of Professional Standards. And in that, I oversaw all of our training, all of our labor management, our officer wellness, our crisis intervention, and so that was the 23 years here. So that speaks to the way I talk about like retention and recruitment, and why coming to a police department of this size, coming to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, is much more appealing to those that may be working in, and not to disparage any suburban police department, but working in a suburban department where you're going to be a patrolman for 20 years of your life. And even when you get promoted, you just become a promoted patrolman, right? So sergeant's still answering the same calls, you just have stripes on your shoulder, but you don't have that level of opportunity in those other organizations. I mean, I probably changed jobs every 2 or 3 years here, 16 different roles, 15 different roles, and it was very rewarding enough that I decided to come back.
It's important to put that out there, to see that leadership can have that kind of breadth and depth of experience, and what that brings in terms of capacity to be able to lead a department. Right. It takes a special, we all know this, I mean, it takes a special constitution to step into a position of leadership, especially at very difficult times. I have just a couple more, okay? I promise. I'm going to, because I just want to be mindful of members that they too all want to.
It's important you ask the questions you need to ask. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I got off on your resume and we were talking about the rank and file, for lack of a better word, I was curious about your thoughts about our community resource officers. I have been blessed to have the most amazing, and you know where I'm going with this, the most amazing community resource officers between Andre and Brian and Christine Luffy. They are, they are beyond shining examples of what a department looks like. But unless this is just rumor, I worry a little bit about that we might be adjusting what community resource officers actually look like or the kinds of work that they do, and I just find them to be incredibly important, and I was wondering what kind of thoughts you might have about, in general, community resource officers and how we deploy or don't deploy them.
So what if I told you I was going to give you 70 of them?
I'll take them.
That is because that is the goal, that we have, that every zone's officers are community resource officers. That it is, because when you create now there are people that can sit in those roles to lead the overall strategy for a zone, right? That is the coordinator of all of these neighborhoods to ensure that the engagement is appropriate, the engagement within the vision and the mission of the Bureau, but that when we create these units, it says to the rest of the rank and file that that's not their responsibility to be community engaged.
That's a very good point.
And in that, I challenge that when I have 3 or 4 officers that are doing that type of work and that's their sole responsibility, the signal to the rest of the organization is that's their sole responsibility. And in that, I challenge that we have 70 officers assigned to the Southside Station, that they should all be community resource officers. They should all have that level of engagement and awareness for the neighborhoods that they patrol. It's what we're demanding. It's what we expect. It's what community expects of our organization. And that's that community police partnership that I talk about. So I will challenge that those community resource officers will still have roles, but they'll be very different in the way in which the unit is designed, and more importantly, that I have a sergeant that's responsible for 7 officers in the flats, right? And in that, those 7 officers have a responsibility to the community, the businesses, all the stakeholders in the flats, and that they're problem solving. And if those 7 officers that are assigned and that sergeant's responsible for them, then the community resource officer as an entity or as a unit isn't as necessary. And so my intention is not to remove them immediately, but my intention is to transition to a place that I'm comfortable. We are meeting the needs and expectations of our communities with all of our officers. I think Zone 6 is doing it really well in your district. They've been rather creative in the way in which that looks. More importantly, they speak and committed to sector integrity. And in that, you have officers that have ownership of specific neighborhoods in which they're responsible for every day. So that's the challenge, is that we create an environment and that it's the responsibility of all those individuals that are assigned to that district. More importantly, those officers are assigned to those neighborhoods. And if we get where I believe we can, then it's far more impactful than a community resource unit.
So then what's the strategy to win the hearts and minds of the rank and file to understand that that's really the charge? That is what we are asking them to do, especially in a very young department. And I don't know the specifics of the statistics, so I won't go down that road. But I have suspicion that the department is considerably younger than it has been in the past. Am I about right?
No, you're correct. So right now, I believe over the next 7 to 10 years, 228 members can retire. So that means that we have at least a 2/3 of our police department is not retirement eligible. We have hired a tremendous number of officers over the last 10 years, and so we have far more younger officers than mature officers, right? And in that, it's I sit on these interview panels. I've listened to why, and when I talk to hiring officers, they want to have value. They want to have purpose. And to be quite honest, answering alarm calls isn't purposeful. Answering false alarms and parking planes isn't purposeful. So we're going to give them purpose. And in that purpose, I think you start changing the DNA of an organization. They want to help our community. They want to be guardians within our community. But if we don't show them that level of intention or that level of purpose, we just send them call to call to call with mindless, endless days.
It's robotic.
Then we end up exactly with what we have. And in that's where we have an opportunity to change culture. It's where we have an opportunity to change the DNA of an organization by giving them purpose.
Yeah.
And ownership gives you purpose.
So that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So the benefit of a younger department can actually be that you don't have to unthink somebody or untrain somebody, but we can actually set the standard very early on of what the expectation is and how and why that's important and how to achieve it and how and why we will give you the tools to be able to achieve the standard that we're setting for you.
Right. And I think of a time we used to value when I would look at like their resumes or submissions. We would value the candidate that was number one in the gun club, but we wouldn't value the candidate that was a volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club or with the church with the same level of intention or same level of priority. And so it's about who and what we give value to. As it relates to, you want to talk about community police partnerships, you want to talk about servant leadership, servant behavior, then you start to focus your attention on recruiting those that are in the service industry. At the end of the day, it's on the side of our car, right? We are here to serve. And in that, you must seek those individuals to employ that believe in that philosophy.
I really have to stop. I really want members to have an opportunity. I would like to put out just one last thing, and this I know is going to be a very hot topic for all members that want to talk about it, but it's the escalation in gun violence and the unbelievably difficult challenge that you face when guns flood the street. I don't think there's a day that goes by that a constituent doesn't say to me, "Krause, what are you doing to solve gun violence?" And I say, you need to call your federal legislators and your state legislators. I don't know how to stop the fact that there are 400 million handguns on the street. And those are the legal ones that we know of. We don't necessarily know of the illegal ones that are on the street and the cancer of gun violence that they are causing. And so I don't know that I even expect an answer from you at this moment in time. I know members, I'm certain, are going to want to know, what if there is a strategy to deal with this escalating gun violence that, especially that we hear of every day? You can't go to a shopping mall, you can't go to a church, you can't walk the streets, you can't go to a festival, you can't, where you don't run the risk of some deranged mad person with an AR-57 that just decides it's a perfect time to take out a whole bunch of innocent people. So, do you want to go there for a minute, or should I just let it go and let other members do that?
I mean, I holistically, I understand the challenge with the environment and the world in which we live today. So that's rather different than maybe a reliable strategic plan for reduction of gun violence in the city. And so I think they sit in two different spaces, because we're talking about like the random mass shooter versus the everyday gun violence that plagues our neighborhoods. And so there's that tends to be in more of the legislative space, and then what we're talking about with community violence is more in my space. So I can speak to that collectively. I can speak to that in another question. It's really up to you all.
Okay. Madam President, I'm going to let go here. I certainly have more for a second round, but again, I'm going to be mindful of members, and so I'm going to stop for now, but I would like second round when the time comes,
Thank you, Councilman. And I'm going to go to Councilman Coghill, the Chair of Public Safety.
Thank you, Acting Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Scarato?
Good morning.
Good day. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. As I told you when we met previously, I'm not more interested in your past and whatever issues came up there. I'm more interested as to how you're going to deal with the problems with the Pittsburgh Police Department. One of the biggest challenges I've stressed to you is recruitment, for starters. Do you know how many police officers you're at right now?
806.
Oh, I had 808.
806.
Did we lose two overnight? Or?
806.
Okay. That's good. I'm glad you're aware of that. Of those 806, I believe able bodies, and when I say able bodies, take out the chiefs, take out accommodated duty, take out men and women who are in the service of some sort who can't be deployed here, or they're deployed somewhere else and they can't be here. I have that number at what? Do you know what that number is at?
So then you start talking about mid sixes, low sevens, mid sixes. You may go a little lower, but
I was going higher.
Okay.
749.
50 off. So counting my office. Oh, I also think of people that are in roles that would be better suited by civilians, like we spoke about, the desk officers. We start talking about civilianizing, where we have people that carrying guns, able-bodied, trained professionals that are handling civilian tasks, and then evaluating what that looks like. So that is
Gotcha.
right.
Yeah, that's okay. We're in the same ballpark, so that's all that really matters. So we're at 808 or 806 right now. In your frame of mind, what is the right number for the Pittsburgh Police Force?
I think it depends on what the city of Pittsburgh expects from its force. I think right now we are a very concierge-oriented police department, and that means anytime you pick up the phone and dial 911, we will send a police car. We will send 2 or 3, and they are oftentimes not calls for service that should or require police with that level of training, that level of equipment. For instance, we handled last year, the number one primary call for service was parking complaint. We answered 10,000 of those. That is 45,000 man hours that are dedicated to parking. And in that, it is a tremendous resource drain on the department, because it takes 45 minutes to handle a call. Our second call for service was burglar alarms, and they were all, which 98.7% of them are false. And we spend another 30,000 man hours on burglar alarms. So in this concierge style of policing, will be taxed to the limit on a daily basis with this number. So my objective, my commitment is that we start defining what response looks like in a police department today with the resources and the numbers that we have today that focuses on violent crime reduction, community police partnerships, quality of life. That we aren't this concierge level of police department. We aren't this concierge police department that will respond to everything. I mean, it's almost unconscionable that in 2023 we don't, and as technology exists, that we don't have an online reporting system for our community members to file their own reports for things like theft or criminal mischief or all of those lower level crimes. And in that, how it frees up, how it unobligates the officer's time to focus on what we say is important for the city. So that's the challenge. Is the number that we have under the right circumstances the right number? Certainly. If we start transitioning to police officers out of those roles where we know civilians will be far more useful, far more impactful, then I believe we're right where we should be. But that's a commitment collectively that we have to make to create an environment where they're focusing on what we say is priority of the city.
So when you say we're right where we should be, you're referring to where, in your mind, if we could eliminate parking calls. So what? How would we do that? Are you referring to the parking authority should respond to those, or what?
I say it tongue-in-cheek at times. We have an entity that has parking in their title, yet they're not handling parking complaints. And so if they're by legislation or by statute not permitted to do so, and I've started a more in-depth research on that because I think that was even a question that came up, then maybe should we be increasing our motor unit to have a parking component that focuses more on those calls? Because what we're asking, and I use this as an example, I was listening to the radio on Tuesday, and there were 3 parking complaints in downtown. It was 10:30 in the morning. So they took the car out of Lawrenceville to send to the parking complaint at 16th and Penn. They took the car out of the Hill, sent to a parking complaint at 5th and Stanwix, and they took the downtown car and sent to a parking complaint on Fort Duquesne Boulevard. 3 calls, 3 cars, 45 minutes. And in that, Lawrenceville lost its car for, in essence, an hour and a half. The Hill lost its car for an hour and a half. And downtown lost its obligated walking beat for far more things that are important for an hour, for 45 minutes to an hour. So those are the parallels I draw to say that we have this expectation that they're going to respond to these calls, but what is the negative impact when they do? Where else are we compromised because of that response?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in an ideal world, right, the parking authority would respond to those calls.
That is correct.
I don't think they have the authority to write a ticket, but that would be legislatively done through this body, I would think, or, starting with the mayor's office to request it. So, and I agree with that. I do. I'd love to see you not have to respond to calls like that. You said parking. What else was there?
Alarms was our number 2
Alarms,
call. So you have
alarms.
an opportunity to use verified response. They do it in Detroit. So if there's not a second indicating factor to the alarm, we don't respond. So keypad activation. And with technology, we know that most alarm systems now have cameras inside the home, glass break detection, motion sensors within the home. So there's oftentimes an ability to capture a second event that would indicate that it's an actual burglary or there's a potential crime in progress. We're not talking about not responding to panic alarms. Those are different categories. But when your front door is the only activating point, it's a 2-car response because we treat it like a burglary. And in that 2-car response, we just took a police car out of service for 45 minutes, 2 officers out of service for 45 minutes, 77,000 times a year. We average about 28 of those calls a day. And so in that, think of the drain of resources. More importantly, if we weren't responding to those type of calls, what better use of those officers' times can we get in crime reduction strategies, partnerships, quality of life calls?
So ideally, if we could eliminate those, burglar alarms, parking issues, you feel that this at 808 or 806, we'll use your number, that's the right size. Is that what you feel?
Oh, no, not the 800 number. I believe our budgeted number of 900 is the fair number. But I know if I'm forced to operate in this number today, which is our reality, because even with 2 classes on in 2023, forgetting the 2 classes in 2023, they don't come in service to June of 24 and September of 24. So they're not even available to us. So I have to operate that this is my real number today, with the goal of getting us back to full staffing. But in that, there are opportunities to ensure that we're not having our resources drained on things that aren't police centric.
Absolutely. And that may take a while to get that to this table and actually probably years, I would say, before we can actually come up with a system where the parking authority can go and respond to these calls. So we're at 808. Next year, July, because I will say the bleeding has stopped a little bit with the pay raise that we approved just a couple of weeks ago, thankfully. Mostly the younger men and women who are going to other departments, as you referred to. So the pay raise helps, and I do realize that Pittsburgh Police Department offers room for advancement, and that is the carrot that we can attract younger police officers to come to the Pittsburgh Police. Or SWAT, as you said, many departments that you worked in. I feel, there's 260 or so officers that can retire today. Now, with this pay raise, I feel like, okay, that enabled us to kind of stop the bleeding. They're going to stay on for another year at least, because that's going to increase their pension paycheck for going back to this previous year's payroll. Next July, I feel like we're going to lose a lot, because I feel a lot are staying on just because they're going to increase their financial security by staying on for another year, and that'll increase their monthly check as well. So you mentioned recruitment classes. We have, you said 2 recruitment classes.
So yes, we'll have one.
Are you referring to the one recruitment class with 3 people?
No.
Okay.
I don't dismiss them because they are important, so I don't want it to sound like they don't matter.
Right.
I'm talking about the class that will start, a basic recruit class that we're going to start in July, on July 24th, and then we're preparing for another basic class to start in November. It's not date certain, so that is what we're moving forward to accomplish. That was the commitment from the mayor's office, the public safety director, and human resources, that we could process another class that we believe we can get started in November.
So before the end of this year, you have a commitment from the mayor to put another recruitment class on?
Yes.
Okay. And the first recruitment class, I think we're going to get 25 or so?
They're saying that number because of elimination, but we could have 35 in that class. We could have 40. We don't know, because of the number of candidates that have been have been onboarded up to this point, how many will complete the entire process. So you say you may lose 10. So we could have 35. So whatever is available to us at the time the 24th gets here is what we'll start with.
Okay. I will say you seem to have a grasp. You know the numbers as far as this police department. I'm happy to hear that. I still don't think we have a good plan in place. This is the first time I've heard, so you know, that we're planning another recruitment class this year. I'm the public safety chair.
I think that was very recent, as in this week.
Right? Is that right? Okay. Well, it's I highly recommend it, because we lost 3 this week. I don't know if you know that, whether I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were. So that, to me, is your biggest challenge, recruitment. Officers that we're losing on a weekly basis, I would say. So to hear of another recruitment class, that's great. We're going to have to keep putting recruitment classes on. It's going to have to be continual, I believe, in order to get us to a feasible number that we can work with. Okay, we'll get off that subject. You familiar with our traffic stop legislation?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I believe Reverend Burgess is the sponsor?
I co-sponsored.
Oh, you co-sponsored. Okay. We hashed this out with Professor Harris, a lot of different, so-called experts on this. I know you are going to be a police chief, and you're going to take your orders from the mayor and what legislation comes through this table. But I want to know your personal thoughts on that. Now, if you're familiar, this legislation calls for us to not pull people over for a headlight that's out, a license plate that's not properly shown, a host of things.
Right.
I'm not going to go into all the little things, but what's your personal opinion on it?
So the enforcement, well, first, professionally, I am responsible to this legislative body and the mayor's office and the ordinances that you put forward. So my professional position is whatever this legislative body puts forward as relative to your constituents' desires and demands is the obligation of the chief of police and the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. So let's put that aside.
Absolutely.
Personally, I have not read any data that suggests our city is any less safe when we don't enforce low-level primary violations. I also haven't reviewed or seen any data that supports or purports that we are less capable of holding those involved in violence any more responsible, while being able to enforce those low-level violations. So I think this ordinance is born out of a lack of transparency from the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. And in that is that we aren't providing data that will, with a fair degree of credibility, show that our officers aren't participating in disparate practices to communities of color. And in that level of transparency, or the lack or appearance thereof, creates legislation such as this. And so I submit to say that we have officer evaluation monitoring tools with IA Pro that we're going to be standing up and operationalizing over the next 2 months that collects that exact data. And in that we are going to provide quarterly those engagements, those encounters with our communities, to ensure that the communities beyond aware of how in which we engage, especially in communities of color, where we haven't had and oftentimes don't have the level of trust and relationships that my word is enough, right? We need to see data. We have the ability to monitor behavior to ensure that our officers aren't participating in that type of practice. So the personal side of me says that legislation is unnecessary if we are as transparent and responsive and we are intentional in the oversight of our officers. And in that we have a system to do so. And I commit that we will provide and be transparent to our communities, to this body, to the mayor's office, as it relates to those initiatives and that monitoring. And so do we know how oftentimes that a single officer would engage in those low-level primary violations? And in that, is it to the demographic, is it all black males, 25 and so that's something we can capture, and then it's something we can intervene upon if we find it to be disparate. So that's my personal belief, is that we will monitor, we will oversee a responsible policing strategy that doesn't necessarily or doesn't require those low-level violations as a means of ensuring public safety.
And we talked about this. My personal opinion, I will tell you, is that's going to create a problem, I feel, for the young men and women who are driving around the city of Pittsburgh knowing and thinking, oh, I can't get pulled over, tail light out, headlight out. But the minute they go into Churchill, the minute they go into Monroeville, then they're relative to be pulled over for that. So I think it creates a lot of problems. And you and I talked about this. And for me, this legislative body should not be making traffic stop violations and rules for the police department. I believe it should be a matter of policy. It's simple. The mayor says we are no longer pulling people over for these whatever violations. It's that simple. Do you agree with me on that?
No.
My question is this. I think an officer is just as likely or more apt to follow the lead of the police chief or the mayor as to what your policy is, than rather us go through all the confusion of the legislation. And then that opens us up for lawsuits, I believe. Legislation, if we pass it, policy, everything's cut and clean. Your officers, know that by your direction and the mayor's direction, it's as simple as just saying we're not doing this anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
If we don't have a fair and equitable process in place, this ensures our communities that we are at least aware and we are going to govern it in a different manner. So my commitment, my charge is then to create a fair and equitable process that the community and this legislative body and the mayor's office believes doesn't require an ordinance. And so that's the objective, and that will be the process moving forward. As of today, we have the ordinance. We will follow the direction and will of council and the mayor's office. And in the process of that, I will be developing a strategy and a policy and oversight that ensures to this body you won't need an ordinance to govern police interactions with our communities.
So you agree with me?
In some instances, sure. For some instances, sure.
I think policy from the police chief is much more effective than any legislation that comes from this body.
I can
We don't know police work. You know it. They
I can
trust you.
regulate officer behavior. I can take action against those that
Absolutely.
operate outside the values and policies of the Bureau. It's a little different holding or having an accountability process for an ordinance versus a policy. And so therefore, I have much more influence from a policy position than we will from an ordinance position.
Absolutely. We talked briefly about this when we were in my office. And this is a concern for me because I've gotten calls about it, many calls about it. When I believe there's 5 commanders spots open.
At the current, currently,
Five?
yes.
Okay. And I stress to you, I'm a big believer in whether it's the mayor, whether it's a new police chief, and promoting and bringing your own people that you trust in your own little circle. However, there was a application process that's put in place by the city of Pittsburgh. The deadline was, do you know when that deadline was?
I don't.
Before you were
It may have been
hired.
last year.
It may have been last.
I don't. It was recent. I could tell you that.
Yeah, right. So I believe there was 20 officers that put in for promotion to commander through that process. Now, as it sits, you come in, and from what I understand, you want to open that up, and everybody can reapply. Correct?
So I did open it up, and there was no need to reapply.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there
Give
was
others a chance
an
to
opportunity to apply.
Right.
Yes.
Do you feel that's fair to the 20 who applied, who last year were sitting here saying, I want to be a commander, I love the city of Pittsburgh, I want to serve it in that way, and that group of 20 now, and I understand, again, I want you to have the right people around you. I'm sure of those 20, they're very good qualified candidates there. My issue is, it's not fair to them, because you're the new police chief coming in, and we're going to reopen it up. Where were those people last year that you might have confidence in and around you? It's not your fault that your people that you want in that position missed that deadline or didn't apply for it. It's the mayor's fault. You know, he should have, if he had hired you sooner, then, you know, the application process would still be open. Or, you know, so what are your thoughts on that? I know that I know your instinct is, yes, you probably know many people in this Pittsburgh police force from working here for many years. Is that fair to those 20?
Fairness, in the reality, I don't believe we created an unfair environment. For instance, this process started, I believe, in 2022.
Application process.
Yeah, and it's still in the application process because they hadn't taken any substantial steps, interview, evaluation, to be considered for these roles. And so in that, at the time when it was open, some people weren't eligible to even apply for the position. Some people, and we talked about this, didn't know who the chief was even going to be. And I think that matters when you're talking about considering to become a member of senior leadership.
I agree with you, but that's not our fault.
That's not anybody's fault.
You weren't here.
Nobody's
okay,
fault.
so you know
Right.
you got to deal with what's in front of you now.
Right.
And to open that process up, I just feel when we talk about fairness, which I heard you mention a few times, I don't think it's fair to the 20 who applied. I really don't. I would personally be upset if I were one of those applicants and 3 new people who had no interest in being commander last year, whether it's because they know you are recruiting them personally, it just doesn't strike me as fair, that's all.
Understood. And I think at the end of the day, the process will be equitable. The process will be fair. The process is far more now inclusive of people that weren't eligible, weren't interested. The true reality of it is if I want to be a commander, I've got to ensure that the person I'm working for is I'm vision and value aligned with, or it's potential for disaster, and it's not productive for the organization. In that, I would assure you that, 1, there haven't been a lot of other applicants. 2 is the best of the best will still always outshine. And if we look back a year from today and you can suggest that someone that was part of that process was selected and less than competent to be in that role, then I will take on all of the darts that you want to throw. But I assure you, the people that we are going to promote are qualified, competent, and committed to the vision and value of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police.
Yeah. I
And the
trust
best
you.
will be the
Yeah,
best.
right. Okay. I trust you in that. I just, again, if I'm one of those
Fair.
20,
That's fair.
it's no good for me, I will tell you. I just have a few other things. The fleet, what kind of condition your vehicles are in? Do you know how old they are? Do you know, have you been briefed on this?
I have been briefed on our vehicle situation. So I understand that we are, we have done a lot to improve fleet, and there's just more, I would just leave it, there's more opportunity to improve.
You need cruisers, buddy.
We
You really
need,
do.
we have, I think we have like 45, we were allocated maybe 55, now we're down to
We
45.
got 29. We had 60 originally.
it moves
Now we
around.
got 29. The price went up, inflation. We can only afford the 29. We have 30 more that we really need just to keep up to par. So the fleet, these vehicles are driven 24 hours a day pretty much. So they're 5-year life expectancy as they are. We are going to have to make tough decisions in council as to where we get the money for that. That's not your problem. But I want you to be a big advocate in making sure that fleet is safe, number one, safe vehicles, but running where we know they're going to get back and forth to whatever calls they're sent to. It's it's very important. I know as running a small business, I'm only as good as my vehicles. We have to get from point A to point B. So
And you talk about officer wellness, you talk about value and retention. They're in that vehicle 8 hours a day is their office. So it being state of the art, being serviceable, matters.
Gotcha.
I'll
Okay.
challenge that it matters.
Right. I'm going to touch on it briefly. This is my last question. You have a lawsuit with Fort Lauderdale. I don't expect that you are able to talk about that.
Not unless you want to become a witness in it.
No, unless you're paying for my air flight there. So I'll go to Fort Lauderdale for you. But here's, and perhaps this isn't a question for you. I'm not quite sure where to direct it. What if they countersue you?
That would have occurred already. So you're talking about those officers?
I wonder if Dan would come to the table.
I mean, I can tell you what's happened already. I am not the defendant in any lawsuit. The lawsuit was filed against the city of
Yeah,
Fort
you
Lauderdale.
filed the lawsuit
No,
again.
the 4 officers also filed a lawsuit against the city of Fort Lauderdale. And in that, I was a witness. I've already been deposed, so it is defined of who the defendant is in that instance, and that is the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Can we get Mr. Friedson? Would you please
I
come
don't
up?
know how knowledgeable he is about all this.
What's that?
I don't know how knowledgeable he is about this and their laws. And
Okay, it's just a quick question. So you don't have, in your eyes, any threat of being countersued?
The officers have already sought remedy through the federal court system against the city of Fort Lauderdale for what they have engaged as disparate or discriminatory practices and promotion. So
you can stay here.
I've already been deposed as a witness
She's not
on
chairman.
behalf
I
of
am.
the city of Fort Lauderdale, who is the defendant in the lawsuit from those 4 affected individuals.
You making sense of this?
Yeah.
Here's what my question is. If he's countersued, and I know you say you've already been deposed,
Right.
he can still be countersued, right?
He could, but it wouldn't be the responsibility of the city of Pittsburgh to step up or anything. That would be his problem, the short way of putting it. But, I don't think that's a risk for the taxpayers.
Okay, I don't want to get into weeds with this. I really don't. I'm sorry I even went there, but, I just want to make sure.
Transparency,
Listen,
clarity.
I'll tell you this. I like you. You've answered all my questions. I've talked to the rank and file, many of them. A lot of them have a lot of respect for you. Ones that I have respect for have respect for you. That's a good sign. I do think you're going to have some challenges ahead of you, but yeah, you've satisfied my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. That's it for me, Madam President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Strasburger, you were here first. Do you want to go or do you want? Okay. And then Councilman Wilson.
Thank you, Madam President. All right, Mr. Scarrato, thank
Good
you.
morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today, taking our questions. Thank you for your willingness to serve in this role. I know it's not always an easy position, especially these days, to serve as a police chief. So thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity. you had the opportunity, and we had the opportunity to meet with you one-on-one individually for some very short meetings last week. And some of the questions I'll ask you today will be repeats for the purposes of asking publicly, and other questions I'll be asking. I haven't had the opportunity to ask you because, again, those were short meetings. So I'll start with, and my colleagues asked a lot of the questions I had, so thank you for those questions. What do you think are the greatest safety threats to Pittsburgh, and where are we uniquely vulnerable?
Gun violence is the greatest threat to our city and our neighborhoods because it impacts every one of us in every neighborhood. I stand fast in saying that no neighborhood in the city of Pittsburgh should be accustomed to gunfire. We don't live on foreign soil. We're not in a foreign war. And in that, violence, death, injury from guns shouldn't be an accepted loss because of where we live. So in that, I believe that is our biggest threat, and we continue to be reminded of it daily. And so how do we impact that is of critical importance to me, and it becomes the focus of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, the sole focus every day to combat gun violence, hold those accountable for that crime, that violence, and in that's where we'd start our strategy to ensure that we remedy that and keep our community safe.
On not just this issue, but any issue that's important to the Bureau, how do you look at measuring departmental progress, metrics, evaluation tools? How do you evaluate commanders, lieutenants, sergeants, street officers, detectives, and just the progress that you're making?
So it's oftentimes data-driven, right? And we haven't in quite some time been so committed to data to evaluate our processes, to evaluate our outcomes. Oftentimes, policing generally, because of the way in which we are funded, doesn't have an accountability system to the taxpayers, doesn't have an accountability system to the dollars that we spend for a specific outcome. So percentages in reduction of violent crime is an outcome. Percentages in clearance rates is an outcome. Percentages for detectives and officers engaging in certain activities is an outcome. And what gets measured gets addressed. And we don't practice in measuring all these variables that should matter to our communities to ensure that for the dollar amount that we are budgeted, that we are accountable to every single cent, and more importantly, that money is being spent towards city objectives, toward the goals of this body, the goals and objectives and strategies of the mayor's office. And so that's the challenge. So I'm beyond supportive of data to evaluate our processes, to evaluate our outcomes, and hold the organization accountable to those metrics, whatever they are, that we need to be accountable, but we need to set them first. And what does that look like? And then I try to be realistic in saying that what is violent crime reduction look like where we say we have had or achieved success. And in those are the measurables that we need to start looking at. And so being a far more accountable organization relative to data is important, and then being transparent and transmitting that data to our community, to our governing bodies, is equally as important.
Thank you. And to that point, would you consider, are you in favor of that information and that data being disseminated to the public in a searchable format rather than a static PDF report, so that people can actually, sort of manipulate the search items for actually accessing the data that they're looking for rather than reading through a long report?
Yeah, I believe that because it's using technology to our advantage. We have partnered with DHS on violent crime statistics, but maybe not in the same other metrics that the communities would expect. Traffic stops, arrests, use of force, those certain engagements with specific demographics. Like, those are the things that we can transmit publicly publicly facing, that don't impact the operation in any way, and create an environment where we're transparent, we're engaged with our community partners to start developing and having input in our strategies. And I think that's important.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that. I was pleased to hear your answers both around looking at the 911 calls and the response, both minutes and number of calls, and your willingness to consider, or your advocacy for moving some of the responsibilities that take up an inordinate amount of time that could be handled potentially by a civilian, whether at the parking authority or elsewhere. I won't judge right now, but moving that out of armed officers' responsibility for numerous reasons, right? So I was glad to hear that, and in looking at the same sort of data from 2018, I think around 2020. The data analysts that public safety has are fantastic, and also there are not enough of them. So I think that probably could be as important in building community trust in public safety and policing as having as implementing the community policing strategy that you outlined earlier.
Yeah, because when I talk about priorities and talk about asset alignment, when I speak to civilian employees, I don't speak to them in place of police officers as a number 1-to-1. I speak of them in roles, and that we have to have those that are specifically, think of like our crime analysts. Well, we have some officers that sit into that in analytical space, intelligence space, and are there people that are better trained, went to college for that specific skill set to sit in those places, so that, and then we take that officer and put them in a role that's more aligned with their training and skill set. And so it's just utilizing people to better serve our mission, to better serve our communities, and allowing those that have a specific skill set to sit in those spaces so that we have a better product for our client and our clients, the community.
Moving on to a different topic, what's your approach to officers interacting with individuals who are unhoused, who might be in the moment experiencing an acute mental health crisis, or otherwise might need assistance? We have our Office of Community Health and Safety working toward in my mind, working toward a co-response model where someone, with the examples that I provided, might not need, the first touch might not need to be an officer. We're not there yet, obviously, but do you think we're working toward that? What's your approach to that sort of co-response model, or interacting in that way with individuals?
So I am a supporter of it because I believe that, again, maybe speaking specifically to specific training and education relative to mental health, I can assure you the amount of time that they spend in the academy with that same level of focus is 40 hours, and it doesn't create a social worker or a competent mental health provider, but yet we've constantly sent police to serve in that role. So OCHS, I believe, is committed toward that goal. They have bringing on 10 social workers, a complement of 10 social workers. The co-responder program from the police side has just completed its pilot in the north side and now is moving on to zone 2 in downtown. And in that, I commit that our resources will be dedicated to success of that program. Again, that's another call for service that has intensive man hours associated to it. And oftentimes in the past, we would leave that situation no better than when we arrived. And when we talk about do no harm philosophy, our objective is when we leave a situation that the people in which we encounter are better off than the moment we arrived. So I support it. I believe in the program. I believe in the strategy. I believe the commitment on the city side is equal to the commitment on the police side, and moving that forward, I believe will impact the level of service that we provide for the unhoused. I oftentimes, those are our most vulnerable community, and we can't continue to fail them with the level of response that existed in the past.
Thank you, thank you. I understand your strong motivation and intention to create a guardian instead of a warrior culture, or to continue what is might be already the case within the Bureau. If it were to come to pass that there was an officer who shoots, tases, otherwise injures an unarmed civilian with physical force, what would be your response? Have you handled police brutality situations in the past?
We don't have a place for aberrant behavior from our officers. and the expectation of accountability is consistent all the time, every time. So if you're talking about our officers acting outside of policy, outside of values, outside of law, then the consequences should be swift and certain. And in that, we have no place in this profession for that behavior. I participated in the prosecution of one of our officers that acted in that behavior, and so I stay committed to that cause. It just doesn't have a place in our profession. So, and there's a difference between, and I'm speaking to the choir, there's a difference between use of force and excessive force, and we're talking about those that commit or behave or partake in excessive force. I don't have time for bullies, don't want them to be part of our organization, don't want them to be part of our culture or our profession.
You answered a question that my council colleague asked. I'll ask it in a different way, and you know the limits to what you're allowed to or able to answer. But how much insight are you willing to provide on your legal strategy regarding the wrongful termination suit? And will it be taken to trial, discovery? I am asking out of a motivation of wanting our bureau and you and your position to succeed. So
I mean, I'm willing to discuss it as open as the questions you ask. I'm versed enough in this case to know what creates a witness out of you.
Thank you. Because I'm not.
and then what then also can be used to contradict the claim. So whatever question you may have, willing to answer openly, transparently, and if it's off limits, I'll tell you the same.
Do you believe it'll go to trial?
I don't know the answer to that because oftentimes, that is up to the city to determine. Right now, it is with it's the city of Fort Lauderdale has filed a motion to dismiss, so that must take its course and then be adjudicated from there. If obviously that motion is denied, then we go into depositions, and those would be the instances that the city may make a decision to resolve it in various manners. I can tell you the one manner that is no longer under consideration is me returning to Fort Lauderdale as their chief. Mm-hmm. So there won't be a time in the near future that Fort Lauderdale settles this and the resolution is that I become the chief of police of Fort Lauderdale again. I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. My last question is, have you formed working relationships with citizen review boards in the past? And if appropriate, would you do so here?
Yes, I have. So as a matter of fact, the past director of the Fort Lauderdale version of Citizen Review Board is one of my references. So I think that would tell you how our working relationship was, how cooperative I have been with those entities and those bodies. I think it's important. Again, we talk about transparency and accountability. I don't believe there's any better way to foster that than to have a continual engagement, a relationship that is meaningful and transparent to those members of that board, and in the process is the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, from policy development to training to hiring, etc.
Again, appreciate you answering our questions and being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Wilson?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you.
This is good to see you today.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation in the office the other day. As other members have mentioned, it was good to know you a little better and just kind of ask a couple brief questions, but I have some other ones here, so I'll just get started since this is going on pretty long here. I want to make sure the members have their time, so I'm going to try and be quick with my questions. First, I just want to understand more. I think Councilman Coghill was asking you about the order of 20. You kept mentioning there was 20 in line. Can I have interrogatory real quick? Yeah.
Vehicles?
That's
for people.
that's up to Councilman.
Going up to rank.
Oh, okay. You want me to?
I just want to ask you.
Yeah, there were 20 sergeants and whoever applied to be a commander. And my question to Mr. Scarrato was, the deadline had
It was December,
Okay.
end of
Okay.
December. It
Yeah,
was the
okay, end of December.
5 months ago.
So now the new police chief is coming in, and he's opening it back
October?
up.
Yeah.
So of those
I
20,
have a
if you're
paper that
passed
says-
over, and I'm already getting calls about this, as to,
Send it to me.
it's not fair. We're talking about fairness. And
Okay, I got
to-
you.
To a certain degree, that's
So
what I was
that helps me
asking.
clarify my
Sure.
question. So
Yep.
in that process, if well, first off, do you believe that we should figure out ways to diversify the police force?
I do.
And so to have people in leadership roles that would represent that police force, do you believe they should be, you would seek out a diversity there as well?
I think when we have qualified, competent candidates that are diverse, that we pay attention and have a level of intention toward those individuals as well.
Would you entertain a pool of candidates that are outside the city?
For senior
Outside the
leadership,
Bureau? Yeah.
I have not. I believe the men and women that are within the Bureau currently will serve to represent this Bureau well. They're talented people that work for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. So
Okay.
I don't see a moment in time that I need to seek individuals outside the
Okay.
Bureau.
And then in terms of the recruiting class, or the recruit class, we talked a lot about, I've heard questions about, when's that going to start? How can we get that moving faster? How many officers do you think we need? But specifically, I think we all agree that, the diversity in that class would be good. We talk a lot about that, but really, how would you do that?
So it's intentional. So we start focusing, if we're speaking about diversity, we start focusing in those communities that are underrepresented within the police department. So whether it's the communities of color, our black community, whether it's women, the LGBTQ community, that we are proactively engaging in those communities there. And so, for instance, we will have officers at the mayor's night out on Wednesday for recruiting purposes. People in Pittsburgh Bureau of Police uniforms representing this department, expressing or providing insight and opportunity and advocating for the department on our behalf. And we'll be at a lot of those community events. You talk about recruiting those individuals that have the moral compass of the city of Pittsburgh, the values of the city of Pittsburgh. We have to go to where they are. And that's a concerted effort. That's an intentional effort that we just haven't done. And we haven't done it for years. And so this is the byproduct of abdicating that responsibility to others. And so you have to make it a focus of what we do and who we do it toward. And in that instance, though, we know that we have missed opportunities in our underrepresented communities, and we have to be exceptional in that space to recruit and attract those individuals to the department.
And then if that doesn't work, how would you reevaluate?
If it doesn't work, then we're doing something wrong. We'll reevaluate and do it again. And I think there's always going to be areas for improvement, but I think we'll also have a fair feedback loop of whether our efforts are yielding the results we expect.
I appreciate the Councilperson Strasburger's question about the OCHS and how they would be, working with the police department. You mentioned the co-response that the pilot that happened on the north side, but and I appreciate your response there. But specifically in terms of co-response, I think there's a distinction to be made between co-response and alternative response. And so the question I heard was asking about the unhoused individuals. But my understanding is that co-response won't get us there. I mean, there might be an instance where there would be, some sort of call that would, engage with someone who's experiencing homelessness. But my understanding is that the co-response program is working with high utilizers of, like, say, the system that really truly need like a health aid, or they need to be connected to some mental health services. But in terms of in terms of the population that was described in the question, I think what I've been able to understand is that an alternative response to police would be needed. Are you familiar with like alternative responses in other cities?
Not in, I guess, direct conflict with co-responder. They tend, as I understand it, and my, I guess, my familiarity with it or my belief in it is still relative to co-responder programs. If we're talking about public safety and we're talking about police being a primary participant in the strategy. So typically with cities with alternative response, that's done under the direction of public safety, but with the exclusion of police. So we're not the driving force. So co-responder with policing is usually relative to police response and what resources we're bringing in that police response. So alternative response, I believe, is just it falls under a different division within public safety and then maybe a different responsibility outside of policing.
Yeah. Currently, we have $10 million of council allocated a few years back. Those funds are housed in OCHS, but they are ultimately for professional services, where we previously were, or currently we have a contract with Allegheny Health Network, and then there was going to be this outreach program. There's certain hubs. There is a hub downtown. There is a hub on the north side, and there'll be drop-in centers. I don't know, I just called it a hub, but it's really a drop-in center, and there's one in Homewood as well. And that program was the plan was for that to be expanded, and so that would be the alternative response. So the co-response is housed in the city at OCHS, and then this alternative response was something like similar to how we have the REACH program, outreach workers, and so it's similar how you talk about like there could be a better strategy to parking. Like police don't have to shouldn't have to respond to a parking violation. Parking authority could do that. Be the same thing. Like police would never even be on the scene. It would just be this alternative response. And so I'm interested in that. I'm interested in working with you on that to solve issues relating to the unhoused situation. And just wanted to see if you're committed to, I mentioned this in the office, and I was going to lower in depth here. Is that I think I work with the commander at Zone 1 and 2. And I appreciate, everything they're doing for the zones. But in terms of like a top-down leadership role that would implement large programs like this, I really want to see your commitment to, when this comes down the line, and also when it's built, that there is a commitment there on your end to make sure that each zone is following whatever strategy comes in place for co-response and alternative response.
Sure. I support it wholeheartedly, 100%. Even we talk, maybe refer back to Councilman Krause's question of what does policing look like in the 21st century. We want to minimize at every opportunity our police community encounters that have the potential for negative outcomes. And these are those instances that there's an encounter that would be better served with a different type of response, this concierge level of policing that I talk about. There would be a better response than sending a officer with a firearm to crises X. And in that, when we start minimizing those encounters, then we minimize the distrust and the disparate impacts that our officers will have on our communities. So I stand 100% committed to seeking a different way of policing in the 21st century than we've done in the past.
Thank you. So the money's there. There's a contract there. We have OCHS. And so I'm kind of curious, because I've heard on, some strategies to get there. One would be a call study to really understand who would be responding. So is that something that you're thinking of, to understand the calls that come in all across the city and how those calls could be could have a better response to them?
I think that's part of the BJA grant under the co-responder model, that there is money allocated to study there's money allocated to study the type of calls. I'm not exact, but I believe it was like 13,000 calls in downtown last year. And in those 13,000 calls, what were mental health, what were unhoused, what were drug addiction, what were so that where in which you should be allocating resources toward. And in that, I think it gives us an opportunity to use data to support the allocation of our resources or the manner in which we respond to calls. or what type of calls we respond to for that.
But when that data comes in, we could sit down. It'd be nice to sit down and understand what your thoughts on that.
Right, I agree.
Yeah. The only other question I had was about the outreach workers that we have to stop violence or minimize anything that would create more community violence. There's a lot of different names that people use. Reach is one of them, and so that the outreach worker program that tries to reduce community violence. That's also like a contract that we have outside, with an outside entity that they're hiring these outreach workers. How do you see that coordination happening within the police bureau?
There's true value in having outreach that is not police-centric or not overseen by the police department. We're talking about levels of trust. We're talking about engagement in a vulnerable community that we would otherwise not be able to access. So individuals from those communities that have experience in violence, or whether they're victimized by, or in some instances with the perpetrators of, but that have a level of intimacy in that space. And that builds trust beyond anything that maybe we can do specifically directed at violence, or those, more importantly, those that have the propensity to commit violence. And that's where we're trying to impact. And I think when we talk about community safety, think of like we're trying to stop the next violent crime. And in that, I believe those individuals that sit in that space have the opportunity to impact that in a meaningful way.
Okay. Well, I look forward to working with you. I appreciate your time and answer my questions. And you'll receive these random phone calls from me where I'm trying to pick through.
I will answer
and understand the situation. So I like to have very responsive people at the top. So I hope we can get that from you as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah.
All right, commit to that.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And members, we're going to take a brief recess so everyone can take a little break, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
You good with that? Recess for, motion to recess, please.
Sure.
Motion to recess.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Welcome back to the recessed council interview of the acting chief of police, Larry Scrotto. And we'll begin with Councilwoman Warwick, because you were here earlier for a long time, so.
Yeah,
Councilwoman
sure.
Warwick.
So I guess, thank you for being here. It's a long interview. So I guess I wanted to just kind of come back again to sort of in response to Councilman Krause's earlier question about accountability and sort of the ill will or disrespect or perceived, perceived or otherwise, right, of the public toward our law enforcement officers. And, with the understanding, of course, that everybody needs to feel respected at work. I want to underscore, and this is not news to you, right? But, we're living in a world, I know that myself in high school was, the Rodney King incident, my adult life just comes to mind Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, et cetera, right? So these incidences sort of go on in these names, and for communities of color, this type of incident has been going on for generations, right? So this is a systemic issue that has been going on, and it makes people angry, right? It makes people angry, which is why then that anger is translated, into is then oftentimes, right, directed at officers as they are doing their job, which is of course an incredibly difficult position to be in at work. And so, if people are angry and they're also in a bad moment, whatever and that anger then naturally, right, the human element results in anger on the part of the, right, like, if you feel attacked, you feel defensive. I mean, this is just the human condition, right? So, and while I feel like in the movement for Black Lives, we are, as a society, right, the needle has drastically moved in the past year and a half, drastically. But I don't think necessarily that the needle has moved when it comes to the law enforcement community, right? For all of the reasons that I just mentioned. But we know, right, that abuse of power hurts communities, that it hurts residents, it hurts officers, it hurts the city itself, right? We're looking at millions of dollars in settlements, right, for these types of incidences. And that at the end of the day, accountability equals trust, and trust equals respect, and respect equals more interest in becoming a police officer, which would lead to more diverse police force and all of these things, right, that we're going for. So could you talk a little bit about your plan for, and I'm sure that the rank and file would cringe if they could hear me say this, but for creating a safe space for your officers to process all of this, what I think is justifiable societal large-scale anger that is being directed to them oftentimes personally as individuals, which of course is, how to process that and get to a place where they too feel on board with why we have gotten to the place that we are at, and how they as officers in sort of changing that mindset, whether it's personally, whether it's amongst themselves, whether it's with their family members at home, right, will ultimately benefit all of us, right?
Right.
That's sort of a heavy question, but.
Right. I think I feel like I have a fair idea of the direction. So we're talking about their wellness, and when you think about officer wellness, it's not specific to professional development or isolated to professional development. It's about ensuring that we're caring for their emotional and psychological needs as well, their personal desires as well. And today's officer has so many different inputs into this echo chamber which they exist. And oftentimes they're far more negative than positive. So focusing on the emotional well-being of our officers has a tremendous impact on the level of service in which we provide to our community. So psychological services, people speak to programs like PMAP or employee assistance programs, but historically, police officers don't trust those entities, confidentiality, life experiences, exposures, even those that have police officers on them. So what I advocate for, and Florida had it in Fort Lauderdale, is psychological services that are in-house. And there is a psychiatrist and 2 psychologists, and that they are staff employees to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and that they're providing those services to our officers as an outlet to break the chamber, and to allow our officers to heal from the emotional trauma that they see, allow our officers to live in a safe space with a trusted professional, not someone that does this as an aside to their other duties. And in that, people that, like, almost to the co-responder program, we're providing access for our officers to people that sit in that professionally trained space. We talk about wellness, using wellness time. So I'm going to advocate and institute a policy that gives our officers 2 hours a week to focus on wellness. And whether sometimes wellness is physical fitness, sometimes wellness is 30 minutes of meditation, and where you're just checking out of the moment and allowing yourself to heal from what you see on a daily basis. And we all can acknowledge that the traumas or the level of violence that our officers see on a daily basis will impact you. And in that level of impact, with all of those other inputs, that we have an obligation to them to provide a safe space, to provide the professional services, to ensure that their mental health and well-being is being addressed daily. No different than the way in which we pay them, no different than the way in which we create a fair and equitable system as it relates to promotion and advancement, that we prioritize that with the same level of intention, and that's important. And because the outcomes are tragic when we don't. We've seen them. We've seen them here. We've seen them nationally, from Rodney King to George Floyd. We've seen the tragic results when we don't prioritize our officers' wellness and our officers' mental well-being.
Okay, thank you. So then, yeah, my next question, I want to talk a little bit, and we've had so many good questions, so I'm going to more or less focus kind of on the human aspects of all of many of the things that we've talked about. So when we're talking about staffing and overtime, we've talked about, and I love all these ideas of sort of, online reporting, right, for nonviolent, my lawnmower got stolen, that this does not require an officer on the scene. The two-factor confirmation on alarms, if there's any way that council can make that work, happy to explore, and the parking and all of that. The question is, again, and I'm going to come back to the rank and file and the public is how. And again, also to Councilman Coggins about the tail, sort of the tail light, like pulling people over a tail light. How do we get because the messaging, right, and I can already hear it, right, is that we're not safe if we don't have, if we don't have like the insta access to officers, that makes us as the public less safe, and that, that somehow we are taking something away. So, I've actually, because I'm very interested in the online reporting, and I've talked about that with a few officers, just sort of randomly here and there, and even among them, I have heard them say, well, you never know, like you better, well, you should have to respond to every call, because if you don't, you never know what might happen, So how do we get the public on board with those kind of things, or avoid a backlash?
Marketing, right? And it's a strategy that we have to be very, very visible and very available when we're deploying it. Like, so speaking at these community group meetings, being as transparent about the process and the development of the strategy, so that public stands behind all of us for what we know will be a better outcome, a better level of service. Mm-hmm. And in that, I think when we talk about safety now, they're seeing their officers far more frequently. They're seeing their officers out of the vehicles. Our officers are now accessible and available to start building those relationships, so that level of trust, or that I guess maybe that fear of safety is removed, because now they're building relationships with the officers that are responsible for their specific areas, their specific neighborhoods. And so it's a campaign. I would not suggest for a moment that we're not proactive in the messaging piece of this, so that we get as much buy-in as we can. Well, there will still be people that are going to be irate about us not responding to a parking complaint. Sure, certainly will be. But I think the greater good for what we can achieve outweighs those moments where we have some level of dissension. Mm-hmm. But if we do it, and if we market it correctly, and we are as available and accessible and the reasons why we're doing this strategy, I think it would make sense to a community group for me to say 45,000 man hours were spent on parking, mm-hmm. and how much better we could use that time if it was spent on quality of life complaints in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. the speeding issues you have around a school district or around a school, and the passing of buses, the loud music, the various other issues that have far more impact on the quality of life of our communities that we can address in conjunction with them and not opposed to them, I think then the outcome is much better. And when you start presenting that as a viable option, you start to change, I think, the hearts and minds of our community.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. Yeah, I was just going to say speeding.
Yeah.
Or, right, moving violations. There are plenty. I hear about that a lot. And by the way, our traffic division does an amazing job.
Yes.
I must say. They're
Agreed.
super responsive. So, okay, so the next question I have is about costs, about money, right? Obviously, as council, we have roads, we have parks, we have rec centers, we have programs for our kids and our seniors, we have dilapidated housing, and these are all things that we have to pay for. I mean, they cost money, and we hear, there are budget constraints across the board, right? The city is sort of perpetually strapped. And I feel oftentimes when it comes to all of these things, we sort of ask lots and lots of questions about how, where we can spend and where can we cut, but we tend not to ask those questions when it comes to public safety. But, as in any organization, right, even in any family, right, when times are tight, like everybody sort of needs to tighten their belt. And while I'm totally supportive of the pay raises and things that benefit those types of things that help officers live a better life and attract more family sustaining work, et cetera, when it comes to other things, can we count on you to sort of be frugal when it comes to whether that be, I mean, just off the top of my head, right, I know like all the police cars got repainted and there was a lot of grumbling about, how much did we pay? And I don't even know, right? I wasn't on council, I have no idea. But these are the types of things that folks see, I think, that can be frustrating when there's all these other things that need to be paid for. So, and I don't know if you have any ideas right now of things that maybe, I won't put you on the spot. Oh, you do? Okay, great. Well, please.
Something simple. So I think when you start talking about the budgeting, and especially on the police side of it, I think because salaries make up or take most of our budget, we've already cut in places. I think that we're even starting to compromise services, right? So we start cutting our training budget, and we can't afford to do so there. Like, we know the cost for failure to train. We've just seen what it does to, or how it impacts the city. But something simple as being paperless by this time, 2024, probably spend $50,000 a year on paper. I believe that's not even like an exaggeration. I feel like that's real. So just simple things that you start taking into account where we're spending money, if to the point where we've changed the striping, the color of our police cars 3 times in 3 years, right? The commitment to that and sticking with like some cost-effective measures to ensure that we're not just burning through money because we're not accountable to it. So when I speak to that level of accountability with measurables, that we talk about being able to account for every dollar we spend. That is the taxpayers' money, and I am the steward of that money, which means I'm responsible for how it's spent. And using it and spending that allocation most appropriately, I think, to enhance the services at the Bureau.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But we will be paperless mostly by this time next year.
Great.
Committed to that.
And my last question is about change management, right? We've talked about a lot of things here. And we have the staffing study that is coming out soon, I think, hopefully.
Maybe this week, actually.
Oh, really? Great. Yeah. So, which, so whether that's moving officers from being at the desk to out on patrol, or working more with social workers, or, co-response collaboration, all of these things, right? That type of change, especially for our veteran officers who've been doing things one way for a very long time, and that is a way that has been working, right, for them and whatever. How do you get those? How do you make sure that those officers feel included in all of these changes and on board, and then hence on board, right? Like, how do you sort of put them in kind of quasi leadership way in this evolution?
So I think that buy-in is important for any meaningful change. And will you get buy-in 100%? No, we're trying to get to consensus at the start, and then start impacting, influencing those that maybe don't think that should be the style of policing that we participate in. How do you start changing hearts and minds? You start elevating and highlighting those individuals that do the things we ask of them that are vision and value aligned, that are behaving in the manner or participating in these community police partnerships and these quality of life and this violent crime reduction, and showing like the benefit of that style of policing and that alignment with our vision and mission. And in that, I think you'll start to change those that would be, I guess, maybe less willing to be participant in this new style of policing. And I understand that some people don't believe that is the way policing should be, but it doesn't deter my commitment to that philosophy. And so that's and then promoted leaders. Like, everybody has value within this organization, and that's the objective, is that I have to express to the 899 people, 805 people, excluding me, that they all have value and they all have a role in the success of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and they all have a responsibility to our community, and they have and can find a role where they can impact and influence it in a positive way.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you. And
likewise.
Yeah. Thanks.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Gross?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, thank you. This is a very long interview. I appreciate you kind of hanging in there. I've got lots of quotes from you in response to my colleagues' questions, and some of them covered some of the questions I was going to ask. So I appreciate that. I'm happy to hear you talking, for example, about the number of civilians on staff, the staffing study that's been referred to, and your willingness to talk about how to, I think your quote was, unobligate police officer time for those calls like traffic and the burglar alarms that are eating up, looks like a cumulative 150,000 hours per year if you add them together. That's a lot of employee time.
Substantial.
Right? It's a lot of officer time, specifically officer time. When we had a chance to meet first last week, I read some numbers to you that I have been repeating and sharing publicly online and here at the table. So forgive me to my colleagues because they've been listening to me say this since 2020. But there are benchmark cities that we normally compare ourselves to in Pittsburgh Magazine first, now Pittsburgh Quarterly. That how are we doing as a city? There's FBI data that collects how many employees police departments have, and then how many of those employees are officers. Governing Magazine back in 2015, so this data is a little bit old, kind of put them all out there for over 100 cities. So it's very nice that you can compare per capita what a city has for numbers of total employees in a police department and what the same city has as total numbers of officers. And there's quite a range among the cities that we usually compare ourselves to. For example, Austin has 24 0.4 employees per 10,000 population, and only 18.6 per 10,000 are officers in their police department.
They also carry their own guns.
And St. Louis has employees per 10,000 population, 55.4 employees in the St. Louis Police Department per 10,000 per capita, right? But 38.8% are officers of total employees. So again, I mean, it's not half, but it's only 2/3, right? And this is dated information, but at the time, Pittsburgh had 30.9 employees per capita, so kind of mid-range, right? 28.4 officers. That's nearly 100% of the total police force. So again, my colleagues have heard me say this before, and at the time, that was 948 total employees and 872 total officers. So that was 2015. City population was even higher. But so I think we really need to have this conversation, and I'm really glad for my colleagues' questions and for your answers about really what are the appropriate things for full officers to respond to. Is that traffic? Is that fake burglar alarms? Is that or false alarms? And what are the other capacities that we have as a city? And again, alternative response, thank you for, I actually wrote it down because it was the clearest definition, the difference between alternative response and co-response. Thank you. That was a very clear understanding, and I learned something today. I appreciate that. So I'm really enthusiastic to have this discussion more. I mean, again, back to the kind of ratios and the costs, because this really speaks to cost. Right? If we can fill if we have too many officers in our organization chart, and members have seen me kind of hold up the whole organization chart and circling a third of it and saying, why are these all officers when these are all civilian duties? Like, there's your boots on the ground that you need. They're over here on civilian tasks, basically. So I'm definitely here for this conversation. I really appreciate your ability to speak to it. And I really am encouraged by the amount of homework that you've already done and thought that you've already given to it. Thank you. But there's a couple of topics. Same thing with your response to questions about policing or claims of over-policing, community concerns about the role of police in their communities, and your vow to collect and make public data to track both what I heard as the systemic, I'm sorry, I can see that Zoom is frozen and I'm like not being heard. But okay, this at least there we go. The audio is moving. That what I heard as the systemic impacts on communities of secondary traffic stops or other kinds of officer responses to low-level violations, but also the individual officer data tracking, right? Which wasn't actually part of the question, but I appreciate that you included that as part of your answer, so that we can see all of us together where there are problems. I think you said if you don't measure it, you can't fix it.
Correct.
So thank you. I really, really appreciated hearing you say that. I'm going to move on to something we haven't talked about again, but it's related as a segue here. We also have struggled for the whole time I've been in office, I think, with block parties and small level community events. I always talk about one in Morningside that was a Sunday morning event that was a walk fundraiser for Wounded Warrior Project, Morningside Mile. They got $15,000 bills from the police department for closing streets, which can just be closed by sawhorses like we do for block parties. But that their special event request for their permit to close, 8 intersections of Morningside Mile, again, on a Sunday morning when there's not a lot of cross traffic, they got a giant police bill, and they don't do the event anymore. And we spoke about that a little bit, so if I could get a response.
So I think I guess it's twofold in that regard, is that our special events office, I think, uses maybe an archaic approach to what resources they suggest should be allocated, more importantly, what police resources they suggest should be allocated to close roads. And as we transition to, we don't have enough officers to fulfill some of these. And in some of these events, the police aren't even required for that closure. But because we've used these historic standards if I continue to apply them to every application, then we get an instance or a event that is of benefit to the community, but becomes cost prohibitive because it now has 20 officers assigned to it to what we could, or the community or that group could use for volunteers, for a less costly flag person for contractor through another company. And it was born in a time where special events, in essence, would create or increase salaries for police officers in a time where we weren't paid that well. And so that was a way to supplement income. But the standards haven't changed, and now I have officers that don't want that to be committed to these events, don't want their work-life balance interrupted because we're mandating overtime for the multitude of events that we have. We have the Crush for the Cure on Saturday, and we're going to mandate 50 officers to work this event. And in that, we're going to impact people in such a negative way, unnecessarily, where we have an opportunity to use volunteers. We have an opportunity there are companies that the flag person for Duquesne Light sits at the intersection, probably is a third of the cost of a police officer, and it doesn't require a person with a firearm and the level of training that we commit to it. And in that, I think now for an event like that, a neighborhood event, a walk, a mile run, that doesn't really impact we're not doing it in the middle of downtown on a Wednesday, right? That we have, and we can find alternatives to the police officer with someone in a civilian role that doesn't have an impact, or more importantly, creates an event. Like such a charitable event now is dissolved because they can't afford police services. So we have an obligation where it doesn't impact public safety in any meaningful way to find alternatives. And it has a twofold effect to me. It allows the community groups to have and host these events, and then it minimizes the impact on our officers to staff the event.
Excellent answer. Thank you for that. I look forward to working with you on that forthwith, just first thing. Yeah, because it's such to me, a simple, obvious problem that has a very simple, obvious solution, and yet no one did it for years, right? We kept being promised here at the table. Multiple different council members have raised these concerns over the years, and we haven't gotten it fixed yet. So I appreciate that, and I think I have confidence in you to fix it. I have a topic that I have to bring up. People have seen it in the news. They've seen me at press conferences and seen and heard from my community groups and neighbors, multiple neighborhoods that are impacted by our archaic, outdated, 40-year-old, maybe 50-year-old outdoor firing range. I would love to take council members to go visit it so we can all see how bad it is. And what a both unhealthy impact it has on our residents, and also really just an unpleasant, unhealthy, inadequate place to train our recruits. And so we've talked about it previously. My staff has done research and shared it with the administration. Municipalities can build a certification indoor firing range from anywhere from $3 million, and the most luxurious, fancy that we've found at $15 million. And would you support us building a firing range, indoor firing range, as soon as possible?
Absolutely. It's the best training environment in a four-season city, because we can now train. We can train at night, we can train in all weather conditions, we can control lighting, we can control temperature, but importantly, we put our officers in a controlled environment to partake in probably the most significant type of training, and that's discharging your firearm. And in that, we can create a level of proficiency. We can do it with more frequency, because the impact on the community doesn't go unnoticed. So we don't even train with the level or the amount of frequency that we would like to, because we don't have, we know if we did a night fire 50 times in a year, that all of us, they would probably call other council members that don't even have responsibility for Highland Park about the disturbance that creates in the community. So it gives us the ability to take officers off the road for a very short period of time and train them in what is our most libelous action, and that's discharging a firearm. So certainly.
Appreciate that. Check mark. A related topic is that for years when we've had this discussion, for decades, honestly, when we've had this discussion, we've said like, oh, well, we want to have a combined reallocation of warehousing space and DPW vehicles and public safety training, and we need that all combined. And it's become this kind of albatross of a giant monster facility that is, possibly never going to happen, and now we don't even know how much money it might cost. I mean, it seems to be now a budget of well over $100 million, possibly $200 million. And we don't need to wait. Again, Mount Lebanon just built an indoor firing range. You can build one for $3 million. So would you consider disconnecting the indoor firing range from this future, maybe never moving goal of this kind of mega municipal campus?
I don't know if I have the authority
You
to
don't.
actually state to stake a position in that. I will tell you, I would support the indoor firing range. I think it's a benefit to the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. It's a benefit to our training environment. So I continue to support it. I don't know if I have the ability to extract it from some other project, but I definitely stand behind it.
Well, I will continue. I will promise this table that I will continue to have this conversation with my council colleagues who have the budgetary authority. And we've had this discussion many times with most of them, and I think all of our thoughts are evolving. I'll just put it that way, right? We continue to have the conversation, continue to kind of explore the pluses and minuses and the potentials and the risks, and I will do my part to continue that conversation. I'd like to move on to, I think, a topic that we haven't touched on today, which is that this council and our bureau have had many conversations in the past, and I need to continue and learn about the moving landscape that is technology and even artificial intelligence and the rights and freedoms that our citizens deserve, even with a kind of, I'll say, marketplace that's trying to sell these technologies and these products to our policing across the country, but also, all kinds of things to city government at large. I only recently found out, kind of on live TV, at this table a few weeks ago, that there's, for example, a 360-degree, incredibly high-powered camera on top of what is currently the UPMC building, and I referred to it as the Eye of Sauron in my kind of surprise here at the table. It's like, I don't know if you saw the Lord of the Rings movies. It's like this eye that can see everything all across the land. And I was alarmed by that, but we were promised that it isn't monitored, that it's only kind of like turned on when our police department sees that need. We've also struggled with and have pulled back from the mayor's office having social media monitoring. And we were promised also that we were not using that for policing, but there are issues there. I think also on the use of, possibility of facial recognition technologies, especially through social media monitoring. And we talked about it on and off about kind of police cameras. What is our technical capacity? Do we have enough online storage? How expensive is this getting? Again, kind of where are the community's desires to protect their rights, which is all of our goals. And it's a constantly changing, like we have to constantly keep learning more and adjusting our policies. So that was a lot of topics at once. Mm-hmm. But I don't think any of us have touched on, like, what are your thoughts? So right. I'm going to leave the question wide open like that.
All right, thoughts. So technology used responsibly by law enforcement is of benefit to hold those accountable that are willing to commit some of the most heinous crimes. And in that, we have to have a level of transparency. We have to have a level of accountability in how we use it. And I think oftentimes to the challenge, or with the challenge to word or with community, is that there is not any level of transparency in its application. There's not oversight, there's not policy development around what we know is beneficial to our community, to our law enforcement efforts to hold those accountable. And clearance rates and arrests are relative to them when they're used in the right way. I use a story, like license plate readers were all the hype, and we're boogeyman watching the communities, you know. We had a case early when I arrived in Fort Lauderdale. There was a woman thrown on the side of the road, strangled, deceased. And that was no witnesses, no anything, other than this person's on the side of the road, discarded. And technology, license plate readers, allowed us to piece back a moment in time from a insignia on the back window of a pickup truck, the person that was responsible for that heinous crime. And using technology in a responsible manner is the objective, using technology with the appropriate oversight. So that's where I think our partnership with the Civilian Review Board would matter, like that you have others that have the same level of access to how that technology is being used, the accounting for that technology, and more importantly, that it's used for significant law enforcement purposes. We never want to be the boogeyman, never want to be Big Brother over watching our community randomly. We don't allow it to even happen with our officers and the body-worn cameras, that we can't randomly use it to discipline or randomly use it to watch someone and their behaviors. So in that, I think there's a responsible approach to regulating the use of it, understanding that it has a tremendous impact on us investigating and holding those accountable in our communities for the violence they commit.
Thank you. I'm taking notes here. Appreciate that. I think we'll have, I always say this, but I think as a council, we just need to continue this discussion and continue to learn. I even had people, yesterday, Wednesday or Tuesday when I was out in the community, stop me and ask me because they're studying it and learning about it as well. So it's really because the capacities and the kind of like boundaries just are moving so quickly. And we're not all technical experts. We continue to have to ask those experts and really listen to the public to learn together. Right.
So. And that we had an assault on the south side where a 65-year-old woman was beaten by 3 18 to 22-year-old individuals, not from here, from Westmoreland County, caught on video, and that is the only way we would have ever been able to hold them accountable. And so that level, the technology that exists today creates a level of accountability that didn't in the past. But I think if we don't have the accountability or the organizational accountability and transparency, it looks like it could be used for nefarious means. And I suggest that when you do that, you create that community trust, you create that partnership, then people see it for the purpose in which it was supposed to serve.
Thank you. I'm noticing, this is probably one of my last questions, I think, that we've had several kinds of questions today on the prevalence of guns, what to do about it, prevalence of violence, and you, on your resume, it shows that in Fort Lauderdale, your reorganization of the violent crime unit resulted in non-fatal shootings decreasing by 16% and homicides decreasing by 22%. And it says also, I think, that the strategy, it says right here, it says on your resume, which I think is in the record, in the legislative record of citizens, by the way, can go to Legistar and look at what I'm looking at, that the strategy mirrored tenets of the Group Violence Intervention Initiative similar to Pittsburgh, PA. I don't think I heard you speak to that today unless I missed it.
No, we didn't.
Appreciate it.
Maybe we talked to it over, maybe more of an overview.
Yes, sure.
But we talked to, again, it's very intentional process that violent crime reduction, more importantly, gun violence, is the focus, the daily focus of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and holding those individuals accountable for committing that violent act. And in that, there have to be people there has to be members of this organization, officers, detectives, that are, their charge is to focus on that crime and specifically and only those crimes. And in that, when you create a responsible and reliable strategy, you have ability to impact it in a meaningful way. When we remove the anonymity from those that are willing to commit such violence, when we show the commitment to hold them accountable for those that are willing to participate in such violence, then we have the ability to move the needle. But it's not just an enforcement effort either. For Lauderdale, we didn't evolve in the short period of time that I was there to the other side of this violence reduction strategy, and that is the alternatives to enforcement, the alternatives to incarceration, that we want to create an environment where we're not doing harm, where we're giving those that would be inclined or are subject to violence an alternative way out of that lifestyle, whether it's job placement, job training, whether it's something as simple as clearing up your child support or your warrants. Like there are opportunities that you can utilize social service to create an environment, because not everybody wants to be and participates in that lifestyle. And by maybe geographic boundaries, they're subject to that same level of violence, and how we can impact that in a meaningful way is important. So, but it has to be the focus of the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police on a daily basis, because it impacts every community in this city. There's not one that is immune to that level of violence, and in that, then it has to be the priority of this department. It has to be the priority of my administration, and when we do that, I think we impact the numbers to those degrees where 2019, the city of Pittsburgh was the safest it was in 2 decades. And I think that year we had 47 murders. Now that was the year after, but it's still from that program, it's still from that strategy. So we'll be developing and advancing a violent crime division that takes our resources, collective law enforcement resources, and focuses that toward violent crime reduction. More importantly, gun violence.
Thank you, Acting Chief. I have to say, I found your answers today to be not just well-informed and well-spoken, but broad thinking and highly intelligent, and I really appreciated listening to them. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Yeah, no. I've worked with them, so I know a lot of the way that you police, that's all I'll say. So, let me just get my questions here. Well, welcome back. I'm going to start with that. How's that? But I did hear some of the questions that some of the members asked and your responses, and one of the ones that stood out to me was that you enact the laws that we write, which is great, but what about the times when our laws are superseded by state laws?
Well, you have the authority to regulate us beyond the confines of state law as long as it's not illegal. And so therefore, we work at the will, I work at the will of council and the mayor. So I don't get to, I kind of equate it to policy. Like, I don't allow my officers to decide which policies they like of mine versus the ones that they dislike. And because they dislike a said policy, they discard it. Just like the laws. Like, we don't get to choose which laws we like to enforce, and because we don't like them, we'll just discard them. So as long as the structure and the direction is legal, then I will abide by the will of this body and the will of the mayor's office. And that's just the reality.
As long as it's legal. Okay, that's all I wanted to get to. And then I wanted to say that I think a lot of this started with your search, was there was a lot of controversy and questions around the entire search process, unrelated to you directly, but the search process itself is something I'm probably going to look a little bit further into, because I do think that, but I want to make clear that this is very clear, that even though I have questions about that process, it's because we paid for it. But at the end, the mayor never, it's his choice. He can decide to never have a process and just to appoint who he thinks, best reflects his will and his direction that he'd like to take the department in. So there doesn't have to be a process, but because there was a process, and a lot of concerns and comments came up during that process, I'd probably will look more into that, whether it's publicly or whether I just send some emails. I don't know. But I want to say that I've worked with you previously, so even though the search result came up with, and I want to be honest, they came up with a lot of names with a lot of something. Everybody had something, right? And I think that part of that is we have a lot of officers that were in line or applied that never even got an interview. And so I think that's leaving a lot of people feeling disgruntled, because if you worked for a place for 20, 30, 40 years and put your life on the line, and then you applied for something and didn't even get an interview, and some of the people that were brought forward, including the one who supposedly had broken someone's neck, I think you'd feel some way too. I think you'd feel a little disgruntled yourself, or feel like less than valued, for sure. So I think that that's part of the problem, is that process led to a lot of uneasy feelings in the department. So I want to know how you come in now and take the reins of this department and make officers that even applied for it, or that officers that are on the list for commanders that now you're having a new process, a new list, additional names likely. How do you make them feel valued and part of this team when we're bleeding officers all over, left and right here? Our numbers are low, and when we look at places, I'm going to be very clear, when we look at places like Austin, Texas, that was brought forward, they just voted to take away like $150 million from their police department. Their state is now going to act on what's happening in Austin. So they're losing their local voice. They may be losing their police department, they may be doing things, and people may think this sounds great, but the reality is when you start whittling away at your own local police department, somebody's going to come in and take control. Do you want it to be your local people that you get to have a vote on, that you get to talk to, that you get to interact with, or do you want it to be somebody on a state or federal level? So I think that's a really important key to understand, that's a very likelihood, and it's happened in other places. It's happening right now in Austin, where they're probably going to have, they just said their state police are going to cover Austin, and when that's, until the state legislator has time to act on whatever decision they make, and who knows what that's going to be. So I fear that the reason that all happened was because they also had an incident there where they had a police officer involved shooting. I think maybe two, I'm not sure, but and so there was an outcry across the country and in Austin about the police. But part of that makes me wonder, was it because their numbers were getting so low? Was it because the officers are overworked, because the officers are working overtime? And that's what's happening here in Pittsburgh. Our officers are forced to overtime. They're working, crazy hours, and then you give them a gun and go on the street and say, "Now be careful and don't shoot anybody, but keep everybody safe." It's a recipe for disaster. So I just want to know how you plan on leading that department with all those challenges, and at the same time bring people together that may not actually share your view, but they dedicated their lives to the city of Pittsburgh, and they deserve some respect. So tell me how.
So I think there's value that, one, I spent 23 years here. I went through every rank. I've sat in almost every position, minus being a member of the SWAT team, simply because I can't swim. And that's where we just addressed that. But anyhow, so I understand the challenges, which then I see as opportunities to bond this organization together. Policing as a culture is very tight knit, albeit we like to express our consternation with the world often, but when it comes to the collective collaboration that it takes to work together, I think we do it well. The profession does it well collectively, and then outwardly we express our unhappiness with said factors. So it's when you talk about, I never thought that I would legislate from the Ivy Tower, right? So when people hear me talk and they understand the value add from these strategies and this style of policing, it makes sense, because then they get to see it and what benefit it will have for them professionally, what benefit it will have for them privately, personally, emotionally, psychologically. And in that, we're not, because what I'm not asking them to do is anything unreasonable, nor am I asking them to do anything I have not done. Why I wanted to learn how to ride a motorcycle was because if I was going to oversee that unit, then I needed to have a practical understanding of how it worked. More importantly, could I do it? And if I couldn't do it, I probably shouldn't lead it. And in this instance, the same thing. What we're asking of them isn't something that I'm unwilling to do with them. And then showing the value that it adds by policing in this style, in this manner, so that the public supports us, so that this body can stand behind the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, proud to and proud and supportive of the mission and the vision. And in that, I think then we don't get into these conversations of defunding, and we don't get into these conversations of eliminating a police department, because we have now our officers are committed to the cause, I'm committed to the cause, and then in turn, the community is committed to this same cause, and that's the objective. So being visible, me being accessible and available to our officers, to my officers, to answer the questions of why. So I never put out any strategy or any initiative and don't give them a reasonable explanation about why we're doing it. Never believe in like the just do it because I said. Like, there's a value add, and this is the value add, and this is why we believe it. But more importantly, I listen. How does it impact them? So we're going to enact some strategy or some directive, some policy. How is it going to impact my officers? And they have to have a voice in that development. So that's where our labor management committees come into focus. That's where our policy development committee comes into focus. That's where our training comes into focus, is that we're giving them a voice in. This isn't a Larry Scirotto Bureau of Police. This is ours, a collective effort for all of us to own. And if I talk about ownership in our neighborhoods and ownership in our communities, then they have to have ownership in the way in which we develop our strategies as well.
So, and I also want to say that I'm concerned about when we talk about the zones and the issues in the South Side, which I know they're tremendous, and downtown and other places. With our numbers dwindling, I fear that you're taking them, and I know that they're being taken from other zones, including zones 3 and zone 6, being redirected from zone 3 into the South Side, and zone 6 is very short-staffed. So my concern is that we're not going to be safe with these numbers, because you're pulling officers in every which way. And even though there's some concern about how we'll do the staffing according to the matrix study. Have you seen that?
I have.
You have seen that. And is that made public yet?
No, it's still in draft form, so there were some revisions that they needed, that we asked them to do on behalf of the individual districts. So they had done more of a comprehensive overview of the city and the resource allocation. So what we had asked them to do is to break that same analysis down by zone, so that we would get a fair reflection of what zone 6 personnel allocation should look like, zone 3's on South Side of Friday, Saturday night should look like, and across the board. So that was what they were working on, and I believe that they thought they could have it completed within the next week or two, so it should be coming out shortly.
Okay. So I think that everyone's looking forward to that, because it's been a while that we were told it would be out, and I think people are anxious to see. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not anxious to see it, because I don't put any faith in the studies, because I've worked in the public sector for a lot of years. Before I was elected here, I worked for Pittsburgh Public Schools. And I know when people pay for studies, they usually, when the consultant's doing the study, they come ask you what you want to get out of the study. They kind of get your directive on what you'd like to see in the study. So I really feel like a study is just somebody's way of saying something that they can't say publicly. So I would rather people just say whatever it is publicly. But some of the rumors I've heard is that they're talking about maybe taking some of the different divisions and separating them or taking them out. And somebody had mentioned several times the horses. And I know people think people keep the dogs, and I know that they serve a purpose. But the horses, when you go to events and you see kids at these events running to the horses, and that they actually run it with police on them, that's actually what we should be doing, more of, not less of, and trying to get people to work with the police and get more engaged. And if that's a tool that's being used to engage people, I think it's something that we should be asking the private sector to fund if it's something that we can't afford to fund. So I just want to put that out there. I'm curious as to what you think would happen with that department or that those operations.
I think my responsibility, similar to the responsibility to the budget, is to take a 30,000-foot perspective at every unit within the Bureau, and to ensure that those units are supporting our vision and strategic goals. And in that patrol operations is the foundation of policing. And all of these secondary units can at times become isolated and more event-based, and they don't support the daily operation of patrol functions. So I'm not committed in any direction other than to say I will review every unit we have within the Bureau to ensure that it is supporting our fundamental mission. And that's public safety with our focus on violent crime reduction, more importantly, gun violence, community police partnerships, and increasing and improving the quality of life of our community. So it's to say that every unit has to have value, and it does have value in supporting that mission.
Well, I think when you're talking about value, when you talk about police community relations, that should be a top priority too. So and I see it. I mean, we can all see it when we go to events, and you can and different things, and that they're out there. They're doing a lot of stuff, and I think we have to, all those different vehicles that they bring in too. But I also am curious what you think how we can support victims of crime too. I think that there's a lot of times that people don't feel that the police are hearing and they're not responding. And I sent an email today to one of our acting commanders, and I want to say in Zone 6, he's been really a great acting commander. But he said, I was telling him that somebody had sent me an email telling them that the police have been called several times for youth in the community. They're breaking windows, they're swearing at residents, they're doing all sorts of things. Usually they call me, if they call the police, and then they call me, and I go down and talk to the kids. But they said that even when they talk to the kids, they're just really totally disrespectful. And then the police are telling them there's nothing they can do. And with an absence of a place, how do you plan on we have kids taking over streets and vehicles and driving, the spin outs and things like that. We have kids throwing rocks. We have kids fighting. We have kids in my district. I think youth crime is the highest in Sheridan. And I also tell people all the time, people always say this because kids don't have anything to do. Well, an absence of something to do is not a reason to commit a crime. That's one of the things we need to make sure people start understanding. But Sheridan has more to do than any of my other neighborhoods. And yet the youth crime is the highest there. And I think part of it is because when there's no one at home, a lot of times. At one time I took like 50 kids home, and there was very few parents in the home. But the interaction with the police is always negative for the kids. So how do you plan on addressing youth crime with not a place to take kids? And, I mean, do you engage with the parents at all? Will you work with them at all? I mean, tell me what you plan on doing.
So it's again, no different than maybe community police partnerships. Actually, no different than it. It's about engaging outside of crisis, right? And if the only time that we're engaging our young people are calls for service because they've committed some nuisance or some violent crime or some crime generally, then we have missed the opportunity to engage in a respectful environment, with a respectful dialogue, and build trusting relationships. So that goes back to the whole community police concepts of every officer having that same level of ownership in the neighborhoods in which they patrol. Because when one of my role models as a little kid was I was doing something bad, not criminal, but bad, and it was an officer walking in the neighborhood who took a liking to me, and Mark Agiti, who retired from Menneson, he always sits in my mind of somebody that impacted me at a young age, doing something, being a bad little kid, but it was a positive engagement in my formidable years, no different than other community police relationships, and that's again making our officers available. We've got to prioritize what matters to us as a police department, as a city, and when we do that, I think we have an ability to impact youth relationships, minimize youth crimes. I don't have a position on the facility issue. We can't stop that engagement or that enforcement because there's no facility. We only are part of this, and we'll always do our job. And in that, I think there's an opportunity to engage more because we know we don't have the detention facilities, and to be quite honest, that shouldn't be our end game anyway. So I just think there's opportunities to impact young people in a meaningful way in our communities if we're committed to it.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that was actually one of the things when I put forward the curfew center idea, was an idea to give kids someplace to go that wasn't punitive, that wasn't someplace where they and their families can get help. But what I want to say is I think the reason a lot of these kids are getting in trouble in the evenings are because the centers close early. Anything that we have in our communities close early, and then kids are left on their own. Yesterday I went into some place in Westwood, and it was probably about 8:30 at night, and no one was home, and the kids were, causing a little bit of a ruckus in the neighborhood. So I went and I talked to the kids, but I think the problem is that that one of the things that we need is a resource center so that they are open. They do this in Philly, and it's supposedly working really well. That's so much so that they had to open additional centers. And so I think it's really, and I think we need to give you those tools so that you can have a place to say to the kids, let me take you here where you can be safe, get a meal, get some resources, and maybe talk to their parents and say, come pick them up. And when you get the parents in, then get them some help as well. I did a lot of work with parents in Pittsburgh Public Schools. That's what I did before I was here, But I think sometimes it's just resources for parents not knowing, because nobody wants to be a horrible parent or have their kid on the street. I told you my son also became a police officer, and I said to him when he told me he was going to become a police officer, I said, honey, you used to run from the police. I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I know how to treat people and what to look for. So I think for him it was a good thing because somebody did take time and did nurture him a lot in that area. So I think when we're talking about recruitment and talking about working with people in Pittsburgh to get them, the young people, to get them to be interested in being police officers, one of the things I'd like to see is if you are taking a kid, that there is some mentorship and some follow-up with the police officer so that they can continue to work and build a relationship that's hopefully healthy and say, not one-on-one, because I don't trust anybody. I don't care if you're a police officer or not. I don't trust anybody with kids one-on-one. But so I just would say I would just like to see something that builds on those relationships in a positive way. So their first interaction with the police are positive, not negative. When we talked, I heard you mention about the housing incentives, and that is something that I also have thought about for a long time, putting in place. But I really think no matter what incentives we offer, if we're not treating our officers well, if they don't feel respected, they don't feel valued, which right now some of them do not, I feel like it's not going to retain officers, and we're not going to attract officers because that word of mouth spreads, and we get these negative opinions. So I think, to me, I want to know if you have any kind of incentive that you're going to work on personally to get officers who maybe not totally interested in doing and staying with the police, what incentives you think that you could bring to the table, and how you could recognize and honor the officers that are doing great things.
Half of the battle is acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Right? When you talk about fair and equitable treatment, it's just acknowledging that the work that they do doesn't go unnoticed, that the commitments and the sacrifices that they make are appreciated. And while I don't have the monetary ability to give them bonuses for good performance, there are the acknowledgements of awards and the acknowledgements of priority assignments. And you start building a system that values those that achieve and exceed beyond expectations, right? That everybody's just not the same. And when we have that, I think you start, the level of appreciation is noticed, and it's reciprocal. And like when I talk about like the way, so I think of things from a servant perspective. I work for our officers. Now, traditionally, obviously, by structure, I oversee them, but the better I am at my job working for them, the better they will be at working for our community. And if you are a part of my executive team, you believe in those same philosophies. The better my leadership team is at working for our officers, the better they will be at serving our community. And so I think that changes the environment where people feel valued and respected. Again, when we can't influence them by monetary means, that we can influence them emotionally in a positive way.
Yeah, I actually think that some of the biggest issues that we have in our police department is the way we treat people and treat one another. And I think it's just with everything, no matter what you're doing in life, if you're treating somebody well, they're responding well usually. I mean, unless there's some mental health issues, in which I heard Councilwoman Strasburg address with you already. I think that I also want to ask you too. There's a lot of comments, a lot of concerns about your actions, which you led to a lawsuit, and I don't want to dwell on that. But I do want to say I think there's officers in the zones that are asking what will it be like for them when you get in. So will there be? And they're concerned that there'll be some discrimination towards them. So in promotions or in other, tell me how you explain. How do you address that? To address the disparity and to make sure that you are addressing racism and closing the gaps on disparities and stuff, and you're doing all those sorts of things to try to help increase our diversity within our bureau. How do you do that without swinging the pendulum so far that people then feel that they're discriminated against or reversely discriminated against?
I think you can look at my record, the actual real record of those.
So talk about that, because I think the
real
public
record of
needs to
promotions,
understand
right?
that.
So if we're using Fort Lauderdale as the gauge of fairness, I promoted 15 people. 9 of the 15 were white men. 6 of them were minorities. Of the one of challenge had black man with a master's degree, the only one of the candidates that had that level of education, community service, volunteered on Christmas, gave gifts to children, turkey drives, done all of the community engaged behaviors that we had requested out of his own pocket in some instances, on his own time in a lot of the instances. So he was a person that we suggest would be the model face of policing today. Happened to be a black man. He was the best candidate by far in all of the interviews. He was the best candidate by far in all of his work up to that point. And so selecting him was easy. He was the best candidate, as an aside, was a minority. There were still 9 very qualified white men that got the same opportunity. My assistant chief was a white
But the
man.
only thing that got the media attention was...
Right, because
I wanna make sure-
the voices of
I
a few.
asked you the questions in advance, so I want to make
Yeah,
sure that people
absolutely.
understand that. I know the answer, but I want,
Right, the
I want
voices
you to
of a
say
few
it.
became the narrative.
Yeah.
And to suggest that I chose unqualified people to sit in these seats was disingenuous and just an outright lie. The true reality is I'm a minority. I've never been elevated or never had the expectation of elevation based on my orientation or my race. I work hard to get where I'm at today, and that's the same expectation I have for the men and women that work for me. I said simply, do your job and do it better today than you did it yesterday, and do it better tomorrow than you did it today. And if you do that, you'll have a level of success within my administration. And that's as simple as I can make it. And the fairness of it will be obvious.
And I want to just say this, that I've worked with you in the past, and you were really great to work with. So not just in terms of your police officers, you were great with the community, you're great with your police officers, but you had a really good balance with everything. So I want to put that out. Personally, I know you, that I know that you can do this, but I wanted you to have a chance to talk to the public a little bit. Because there's a lot of times the positions are played out before they even get to this table, and the interviews. And when people were calling me for interviews, the one thing I said is, I'm not going to interview him via the media. I'm going to interview him here at the table where the interview belongs. So that was the only thing that I wanted to make sure that, because I did have the conversation, I wanted to make sure it was public.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Anything else from any other members?
Please.
Me either.
Second round?
Oh, you have second round? Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
please.
Yes.
Is it okay? Want to hang around a little bit? Are you guys all right? We have a few more. So, first of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. This is an incredibly important conversation, and I appreciate the dedication of my colleagues to take the time to have the conversation and ask the tough questions. And first and foremost, the transparency that this provides for the public at large to see who we're asking to lead our bureau. Again, thank you for being here and taking the time to do this. And you too. Much appreciated. I have a number of follow-up questions, and they're not in any special order. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the training center and Councilwoman Gross's request to have the firing range built. I actually had the opportunity in my first year to actually go to the firing range and actually participated in it. It's the only time in my life I've ever held a firearm, but I was at the range and I did get to see it firsthand. You will have my support, Councilwoman, yes, as long as we're acting in a fiscally responsible manner to address the challenges with the firing range. I'm a big component of eat the elephant one bite at a time. This idea that we can't do anything until we can do everything just stagnates us. And so if the first step at getting a training center up and running, if that takes the first step to be the firing range, I'm in fiscally responsible, understanding what we need to do. You have my vote. I'm going to be there to do it. And so the reason I bring that up really is to hearken back to some of the other things that have come up, and it's our responsibility to the Bureau to provide resource and training, to send our men and women out to do these incredibly difficult jobs that we ask without providing proper resource and especially proper training does them a great disservice, and shame on us if we do that. So one of the things in terms of training that I would like to talk about is de-escalation and what your thoughts are around providing de-escalation training for officers in a heightened environment that we live in that can go from 0 to 80 with very little provocation. And that does not provide, it doesn't provide a good interaction in that relationship. So tell me your thoughts about de-escalation training and what it looks like for you and how it could help as part of the curriculum.
So we do it today, and there are always areas to improve. So you start out philosophically. I've said it. I believe that if we believe in do no harm, then the de-escalation portion of our training and our philosophy creates an environment where we're not engaging in physical encounters unnecessarily. The reality of it is we have to create a tactically competent officer. And oftentimes, as soon as I say the word tactics, people start thinking like militarized version of the police officer, RoboCop. No, I'm talking about holistically, tactically competent, so that they're physically fit, they're properly equipped, they're well trained. They have a level of understanding toward empathy. And in that, you're creating this philosophy on a tactically competent officer. And when you have a tactically competent officer, the likelihood for escalation is diminished. Right? And in that, that's the objective of training. And oftentimes, in this Bureau being no different, when we start talking about budget needs, or more importantly, the lack of availability of budget, then training is the first place that we look to take from to support other programs within the PD. So in that, I will always advocate that when we fail to train, we create an environment that is so much more costly. Forget awards from lawsuits, that impacts the trust in which our community believes our department will keep them safe. And that's the challenge. So the commitment to training will always be a priority to me, because I believe our officers, we owe it to our officers, and we have an obligation to our community to have a tactically competent officer that understands that do no harm is the philosophy, but more importantly, that is equipped both physically and emotionally to address the traumas and crises that they see on a daily basis.
Good answer. That's what I wanted to hear. I resisted this in the first round of questioning because I wanted to make certain that all members had an opportunity to interact. But I have to go down that road of, and the reason I brought up de-escalation and training, I have to go down the road of nighttime economy and food and beverage service and what it looks like, and the fact that we have very little regulation in city code. I hear this idea, Councilman, I'm sure you do too, of entertainment district. Well, what the hell's an entertainment district? It doesn't exist in code. There is no such thing. It happens to be where a collection of food and beverage businesses have organically collected, but there's nothing in code that says, well, since they have, we should structure certain things this way as it relates to perhaps security or safety or police presence or additional public works services or all those different kinds of things. Right as you were coming in, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, but I had a meeting with a public safety director, a bunch of rather concerned residents about some things that happened on the weekend and the way police officers had interacted. And largely, to save a lot of the detail, I believe the interactions were caused because of a lack of training, or really to understand why they were there or what they were charged with doing. And I don't blame that on that officer in any way. One of the officers supposedly responded, "Hey, I'm just here for overtime." And bad answer, really bad answer. Right, really bad answer. But I suspect it came from a very honest space in that officer's brain, because providing bodies is just providing bodies. If they're not properly equipped, understand de-escalation, especially in an environment that's charged with alcohol, where they don't have the proper training or resource to and understanding of how to engage in an already heightened situation that could clearly escalate, then we've done that officer a great disservice. So under the leadership of Commander Dixon, God, who I just absolutely adore, and a really great working relationship with, we were able to actually put together a dedicated team, if you will, whatever terminology you might want to use, but they were properly trained and properly equipped and understood how to be on an East Carson Street or a Butler Street or Lawrenceville. They were better equipped to do that. Okay, now we've lost that, and that's kind of fallen apart. And I know, working with the mayor's office and with public safety director, we're trying to reorganize that and kind of put that back together, and meeting a little bit of resistance and so forth and so on. But I would like to know kind of your idea, and I'm sure you knew this was coming, but what is a better strategy to plan, manage, and effectuate a healthy food and beverage environment that doesn't rely solely on, oh my God, it's out of hand, we better go in and arrest everybody.
Right. So I never advocate for our officers being bystanders. And in that instance, in a lot of these instances, that's the role they're playing, is observers. And there's not a method of intervention. One is often, in this instance, currently today, the South Side's not properly equipped with the number of officers it needs to support something so large, something that it has the attraction of so many people at one time in a specific time frame of day. And that is an administration failure on our part to not have, we have, for instance, a third of our officers work AM, a third of our officers work PM, a third of our officers work night turn. When we did it in 2014, we had probably a little over a third of our officers work from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? So that we were able to responsibly police and responsibly engage in what is our most volatile neighborhood at that period of time in a responsible manner, with in an engagement in a way where we're visible and we're proactive before incidents of violence occur, and understanding with that level of training and that level of resource allocation that we are going to minimize calls for service. We're going to minimize acts of violence. We're going to minimize arrests, because arrest isn't or should never be the objective. It's an outcome of a lot of failures along the way, right? And so that it has to be the mindset, but it has to be a strategy. And if we're just sending officers down there to placate the public, then there won't be any responsible behavioral changes. There won't be any reasonable decreases in violence. It'll just be the continued same cycle. But more importantly, then we're putting officers in harm's way at the same time, because now they're not equipped to defend themselves. They're not tactically competent, and they don't know what the charge is. And so in that, it's our responsibility.
They don't. Oftentimes they don't. And this ties into officer wellness, right? Putting officers that are ill-equipped and ill-trained into situations that could bring them harm is not what we should be doing in any way, shape, or form. That is shame on us if we do that.
Right.
I have the opportunity to work with, God, I hope it's Sergeant Zigarella, who does saturation, and what a consummate classic gentleman in every way, and it's so very easy to work with, and he does our saturation operation. My issue or concern around saturation is it's really police heavy and not planning, management, and administration heavy. I am always going to say we need to go to the root of the problem. We set a tone before we react to something that's already out of control. One of the things that I really liked about Chief McClay's approach, and we had done this for a while and it was working quite successfully, was to set a tone in the area at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. So people that were coming in already felt there was structure in this environment, and there are boundaries that I can go this far, but I really can't go this far, as opposed to previously it was do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing, do nothing. Oh my God, it's 1:30. Oh my God, things are out of control. Pull officers in because we got to rein it back in. That's not a strategy. You know that. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. What would complement that, I think, as a really good strategy, is working collectively with license holders that are working with promoters. Much of the bedlam that we see comes from a license owner that is engaging in a promoter or a promotion event that is probably not going to end well, which is what happened that weekend, and all hell broke loose, and there were fistfights and craziness, and my phone ringing off the hook again. And so I was just curious about what your thoughts might be about preemptive, proactive engagement with license holders that we know typically are going to work with promoters that will most likely bring a customer in that is kind of already geared up to cause trouble, and do that preventively, to say, we need you to be a partner with us. I need you to help me. We do this collectively. You can't continue to use these kinds of promoters that we know are not going to end well. Take the money while it's good. When it turns bad, expect that we're there to arrest everybody. Not a strategy.
Right, and to be honest, it's not a police-centric issue at the end of the day. All the stakeholders have a vested interest in Carson Street's success.
Yeah,
and
no more so than the businesses that populate it, regardless of the kind of business it is.
Right.
No one has a bigger interest in it.
And we know that if chaos goes unchecked, unregulated, that it not only impacts the businesses, but it impacts the values of the residents, it impacts the quality of life of everybody down there, and I don't believe anybody wants that. So the engagement is, again, must be done outside of crisis. Like if the only time that we're engaging them is after an event has occurred, then we don't garner any goodwill to have willing participants toward this solution. So the stakeholder engagement, the stakeholder meetings that we used to have, that matter, and I think that gives back to the ownership. Like, we all own this outcome. We all own the prosperity of Carson Street and the businesses and the residents collectively, even though at times we know that they would be at odds with one another and play the blame game. That no, there's no more blaming. How do we collectively solve this? And the police department will serve as the mediator, the facilitator, so that we all come to this agreed upon solution. And I think that's the engagement we talk about as a partner with our communities. And if we are successful in that, then we can hold those that operate outside the bounds of our norms accountable when they are. And there's some legislative measures that you all can take to ensure that we can hold them accountable as well, whether it's disruptive properties or with the DA's office and nuisance properties. That there has to be, for those that operate outside the guidelines of expectations, there has to be a penalty. There has to be a consequence. And
right.
whether...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm overspeaking. I don't mean to. But if there isn't consequence, behavior is not going to change. It is going to continue, and because money's the primary motivator.
Right.
I'm making money hand over fist here, and you're running around trying to figure out how to fix it, but it ain't affecting me because I'm off to the bank. I'll call you later.
I don't even live here. I don't even have the time. They don't even see the business. I've never been an enforcement-heavy advocate. But there needs to be consequence for aberrant behavior, and that's for certain. There needs to be consequences for violence.
Yeah, and I don't mean to make this Southside-centric by any means. It is the industry of food, beverage, and socialization across the city that's at stake here, whether it is Lawrenceville, whether it is Squirrel Hill, whether it's Shadyside, whether it is Bloomfield, Mount Washington, Market Square, Carson Street. It's the industry that's at risk, especially post-pandemic. When I truly believed in my heart of hearts that pandemic was going to be the change agent that we had longed for so very long, that we would come to the realization of what a powerhouse industry food, beverage, and socializing really is, and that we would come to the realization that we need to protect it and nurture it for the value that it has. And the exact opposite happened. The world just melted down around us, and it's never been worse than it is right now. And I can't explain it, and I don't expect you to fix it, but I want you to know that I'm an equal partner with you to figure out a solution for it.
Likewise.
Yeah, I know that.
This is a partnership that matters to me,
Yeah.
and we'll work to come to the best solution for it.
Okay, thank you. And I had to get that on the record. I really want to talk a little bit about traffic stops, and how and why I co-sponsored that legislation with Councilman Burgess. I represent the third largest minority district. There is first Councilman Burgess, then Lavelle, and then Krause. And after the summer of discontent and the murder of George Floyd, and I spoke earlier about it was like 17 weeks. We met every Monday morning at 10 o'clock to discuss this new idea of what policing is supposed to be. And I said this to the council president often, the best part of having done this job is when I leave it, it will be the friends that I've made along the way. You cannot represent constituency year after year after year after year. I showed you the text from yesterday. Yeah. You can't represent constituency for that amount of time that they don't become personal friends, that you're engaged. They are part of your life. And so more times than I want to admit, I've had to have conversations with constituency about how they have to have the talk with their sons. And that is about what do you do if you are stopped in a traffic stop by a police officer. And about maybe 10 days ago, without naming any names or anything, a very, very good friend of mine of about a little over 20 years is a highly regarded professional and executive director of a nonprofit here, has a son, she's black, has a son who was stopped in a traffic stop, and calling me frantically about her worry that, oh my God, I'm racing to my kid, that God forbid something happens and my kid dies today. That's the reality of the situation. I know her kids. I've known them from, he's 21 now, so I knew him when he was a year. And she has raised four of the most amazing kids that I'll ever have the privilege to know in my life. And he was stopped for hesitation. That was the reason the officer stopped his car, was for hesitation. And luckily he had the sense to call his mom over the car so that it was broadcast while there was interaction with the officers that had stopped him. She called 911. She said, I had to call the police on the police. I didn't know what else to do. And luckily a supervisor did respond to the scene. It was ultimately de-escalated. They were insisting on him getting out of the car. He said he was afraid. I don't want to get out of the car and I don't know what to do. And luckily, like I said, his mother was on the phone at the same time. A supervisor had responded. It was de-escalated, but and ultimately at the end of the day, it turned out to be okay, but there were a lot of rattled nerves and a lot of very, unsettled, emotions that day. And so I bring it back full circle to say the reason that I sponsored that legislation with the councilman and why I believe so strongly in it is the number of times that I've heard mothers tell me of the time they sat their sons down to say, we need to have the talk, and what to do if you're stopped by a police officer and how to protect yourself, God forbid, that situation gets out of control. So policy is one thing, and I understand wanting to have sound policy within the department. But policy changes from administration to administration, and the importance of codification is to ensure that certain procedures stay in place beyond who might be holding that office at that time. And so that's why I'm a fan of that legislation being codified, and to do all that we can do to minimize those minor traffic incidents that could escalate to, God forbid, a young man or woman losing their life. So I'm just putting that out there because that's my very strong feeling about it. But I'll welcome comment from you if you wish to offer it.
Again, I think at the end of the day, the ordinance is born out of historical mistrust, disparate impacts in communities of color. And I can appreciate that. I have members of my family that feel the same way at times. So I understand the sentiment behind it. I understand the emotions that oftentimes are very raw that support these ordinances or these restrictions on policing, or more importantly, the left. But I also am a believer if there's strong policy, there's strong oversight, there's complete transparency, and in the way in which we do it, that it will enhance community trust to understand that the motives of our police department are pure. And in that's a challenge that we have failed at historically. And so with policy, because of the ability to enforce policy, I think, the leadership may change, but if somebody chose to change that policy, something that was so impactful to community police relationships and fairness and equitable treatment of our communities of color, that it would be alarming to this body. And then there would be or should be a challenge to why you would change a policy that was so impactful and so important. So I think we all play a role in this. I don't believe there's any suggestion of rescinding the ordinance, so it is going to be something that we're going to follow by mandate of this body. And I will train my officers, I will educate my officers in more intelligence-driven. I don't want my officers fishing in traffic stops, and if that's the reason they're stopping cars is for pretextual instances of another crime. I want them to be data-driven. I want that to be intelligence-driven so that they can get to the same place with data and intel and not this blind fishing expedition that impacts a majority of our community that doesn't have the results of safety. That's why I said at the beginning, I don't have data that supports that because our officers can't stop a vehicle for tinted windows, it makes our communities less safe, or it inhibits or prohibits them from proactive policing. I want them to be proactive for those that are committing violence. I expect it. I support it. I don't support or expect that they fish and then by happenstance they come upon some weapon or some drug. Like there's a way to do it with a fair degree of certainty, with fidelity that ensures that we're not having a disparate impact on our communities of color.
Appreciate that. Could we talk a little bit, please? I forget who brought it up about, but our interaction with either homeless or unhoused people that are populating streets through, I suspect, oftentimes no fault of their own. Really all three administrations I've worked under struggling with what's the right fit to I guess to deal with it. I'm not saying it well. If the very best thing we can do is to allow one to find space to sleep on a public street, then shame on us. We're just failing miserably to do our jobs here, whether that be city or county or a combination of both. But unfortunately, oftentimes you are the person that is being called to make that intervention there. I don't see this becoming any less complicated in the coming years. I only see it being more and more difficult. I think a lot of what we're reaping today is decisions that were made most likely under Reagan administration in early 80s, when many of the social safety nets were just decimated, and it's taken a few generations to really catch up with us, but it is clearly here on our doorstep, and I don't think it's going to be resolved anytime soon. And it's unfortunate that there appears to be the only resource at this point in time that we are able to muster up is to put you in the middle of it. So what's the bigger picture for you, and how do we build, again, the common theme in our conversation today is really about building relationships, how we do that to make it more effective, and what role might you see yourself having along with this council and with what appears to be a new county administration coming in to work collectively and cooperatively to provide better outcome than just simply saying, well, we can provide a place for you to sleep in the streets.
Right. So creativity, I think, is thinking outside the box. Whether it is our responsibility, it becomes our charge, right? Because when someone dials 911, this would be the first level of response, and when we get there, we have to have solutions, or we have to have alternatives, other than walking away from a person that's lying in the middle of the sidewalk and is in some mental health crisis, or maybe isn't, but there's no alternative. So we started thinking about creativity in Florida, creatively creating space, a space where our officers can suggest and with volunteering these individuals in these moments to go to a place where they have services. So the philanthropic community supports those type of outcomes, and that when our officers engage in someone that's in this unsheltered state or in this mental health state, maybe not in the level of where they're harmful to themselves or other, but they just need services, that we can take them to a place that isn't leaving them in the street immediately, that is resourced with mental health providers, that's resourced with social workers, that's resourced with police and all of the public safety sectors to support it. And I think when you think creatively like that, we had donation of land. So because Florida and Fort Lauderdale has space, we could use it outdoor space because of the weather. But here would have to be an indoor space. But again, some similar to like the warming shelters during the winter, or some place similar to that has a level of service. But when our officers, nothing is more disheartening to an officer when they show up to one of these calls and they can't do anything. It doesn't meet a shelter won't take them because of their condition, whether it's intoxication or drug use. It's not a mental health emergency, so there's no referral to WPIC, but it gives our officers an alternative to take them somewhere to seek services. And I think we don't have that today. And so the charge will be to engage the philanthropic community, because it may not be something that the city is capable and or willing to fund, but it's something that's worthwhile pursuing with this engagement of improving the quality of life in all of our neighborhoods, but specifically downtown. And we don't have to go all that far. There are a lot of buildings within town, there are a lot of buildings on the fringe of town that would support something just like this. And if we're going to support the police assets and resources toward it, then we should have a place when they respond in this co-responder model that they can take this person who's in need to get some level of service, some type of help.
So then I want to plant another seed. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't get this one too. Why don't we have a drunk tank? Well, just the terminology, and you see where I'm going. I can see by the expression in your face, just the terminology of a drunk tank. Let's just start there. We used to arrest and intake public intox years ago, and I believe it was over at the Taj Mahal, I think, is where we were able to take people. But we haven't done that for years and years and years because of liability. We take someone into custody, we assume physical liability for that person, and especially in a day and age where we have no idea what someone may have ingested when we take that person into custody, we're really putting serious liability on the city and ultimately on taxpayers, where we could pay tens of millions of dollars in claims, God forbid something were to happen once we took someone that was intox into custody. So I'd like to plant the seed of, you talk about, again, building relationships and partnerships, of what it might look like to work directly with UPMC to, if we found it necessary to take someone into custody that was intox, whatever that driving chemical was that put them in intox, that we would take them into a medical facility, and that we could then, for the protection of themselves and the protection of public at large, actually take someone into custody that was intox, but to provide or put them, I hate that terminology, but to be able to place them in a medically licensed facility under the care of a physician and not a police officer. The idea of not taking a person into custody and the liability it causes us not to cite. So if I cite you for public intox and leave you on your way, and you put it in your pocket, you walk across the street and get hit with a car and die, we're liable. You get behind the wheel of a car and you kill a family of 5, and that citation for public intox is on you, we're liable. God knows what we might end up paying. So historically, it has been not to cite at all, just walk away from public intox, which you see over 10 or 20 years, what that, Officer Murray, did you know Mike Murray? Officer Mike Murray out of 3, great officer. He sat at this table with Kathy McNeely the first year I was in office, and one of the members had asked why we were not citing for public intox on Carson Street, and Mike Murray said, citing for public intox on Carson Street would be like citing for racing at the Indy 500. That was 16 years ago. So there has to be a better solution, a better process, a better outcome for when it does become necessary to remove someone who is clearly a danger to themselves or others, but to do it under a medically licensed facility. And that, I think, could be accomplished with a partnership with UPMC. I just want to plant that seed.
Okay. Yeah, I think we will always work toward alternatives and whatever best solution we can collectively arrive to have a positive impact on that issue, then I'm more than willing to have a conversation around it. One more. I didn't know what BJ funding was. BJA?
Yeah.
The Bureau of Justice Assistance. It's from the DOJ.
I honestly don't know. Can you just...
So it's where we get a lot of our grants, whether it's the Safe Street grants, some of the gun violence grants, this co-responder grant. So BJA provides all of that financial assistance to cities that have been determined to have a need for whatever that program is. A lot of times it revolves around violence, but it revolves around community programs. Weed and Seed, I believe, came out of the BJA grants.
I see.
So that's its purpose.
Okay. I do believe that was all of my follow-up questions. What I would like to say, what I would like to say in closing is that clearly members of council tend to have issues around control. There's a reason that we end up here, right? We're passionate in what we believe in, and we do tend to be a little bit of control freaks. And I've been thinking a lot lately about what it's going to be like to leave and not be sitting at this table, and to walk away from a position that afforded me at least some sense of authority, if you will, to help to navigate the city through these difficult challenges that we face every time. But leaving and seeing that we're in as good hands as we are, with you coming in to lead the Bureau, it gives me a great sense of comfort that even though I won't be here in a professional capacity, that we will be in good hands. And as a constituent, knowing how to reach you.
Yes.
And, I said this to the mayor too. I'm like, don't think I'm just going away. I'm just going from a councilman to a constituent. I'll be calling you all the time, trust me. But it gives me great comfort to see the level of professionalism that you bring, and the good choice that really has been made to put you in the leadership position to lead the department. And I'm happy and proud that you're here, and clearly you'll have my support. If you knew that already, but clearly you have my support and confirmation, and I really appreciate you taking a long time to come and sit here and talk with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the support from all of you.
Thank you.
Anything else from members? Councilman Calkins?
Sorry.
Don't worry, we're almost through. A couple more hours, we'll have you.
I got 6 hours of meeting. I have a 6 o'clock. As long as we don't miss that one, we're good.
Well, as long as he doesn't go round 3, you'll be out of here. So the one thing we didn't touch on, and I felt was important for the public to know and for you to just express, was I have other professional experiences, NCAA men's basketball referee. Now, let me just explain to the public or anybody that cares, this is not high school. Could be a real profession, and it is a real profession. You made probably a decent paycheck doing that. When I see you were, in a Final Four game, that could lead into the NBA, that could lead into other things. So I think it's important, number one, I know, and I just wanted you to express to people, I know that you have committed to not pursue that profession while you're here as a Pittsburgh police chief, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And on that subject, to me, that's very admirable, right? You could have made probably more money in doing what you're doing as a referee, and I don't want you to throw numbers out or anything, but I have a rough idea as to, maybe not. Your new paycheck's pretty good here, so that's, I don't know, but it's a nice second income for you that you choose to pass on because of your passion for this city and to be our next police chief.
That is correct.
Good. Admirable. To me, it's a big bonus. First of all, I didn't want you doing a side job because I feel like we need you here in the Pittsburgh when things go awry and whatever. And I will just say this about sports in general. I read an article, I forget which news outlet it was, as to being a referee is a lot like being a police chief. And I grew up playing sports. It's what kept myself and my brothers out of trouble. I believe sports are a metaphor for life, right? I will tell you, I was the person on that court or on that field that would be yelling and screaming at you until you made a bad call.
Technical foul.
But I would always, yeah, that's right. You don't hesitate to throw technicals out. Is that right?
Technical foul.
But I'm also the first one when a call goes in my favor, whether it was good or not, to pat you on the back and say, "Great call, ref." So if you want to just expand on that at all, that's fine. If you want to just leave it at that, I think I covered it. I just wanted the public to know that, you really chose to give up a good second income to be this police chief, and probably a passion of yours, I would venture to say. I'm sure you don't just do that for the money. And I would love to see you do this. I have a young police officer. I'll get his name for you. I can't remember his name. He's from Carrick originally. I think he's at Zone 3. But he wanted to start sort of a basketball league in Carrick, which I think sports, and Madam President has really taken the initiative, as she does on so many things, for youth to have our youth have something else to do.
Right.
For me, there's no better way than sports. It really isn't. It's something I was passionate about. All I cared about was my baseball game getting rained out or not as a kid. So I'd love for you, with your experience, and you could referee that. We will allow you to referee that, okay? Pro bono.
Pro bono.
Yeah, right. So if you want to expand on it, fine. I just wanted to commend you for that. I wanted the public to know, that you will not be seeking another career as long as you're here as our police chief.
Yeah, I talked when I spoke with the mayor. Obviously, that was a concern of his as well. But I expressed, I've been privileged to do two things that I love, and I've never had to choose between the two. And so this was the first time that was a decision that I would have to make. Obviously, it's a willful decision for something that I think is much more impactful to society. What we do matters, who we do it for matters. I understand the work and commitment it took to get to the Final Four. I also understand the work and commitment it takes to be the chief of a major city. And being the chief of a major city, I also understand I can never get back to the Final Four. So that is a sacrifice that I think is worthwhile. And in that, what we do, who we do it for, it all matters. So leaving this world a little bit better than when I got here, leaving this department a little bit better than when I arrived is meaningful to me as anything that I could accomplish in sports. So that's why we're here.
Well, that's great. You know, I got a lot of feedback from you from past retired Pittsburgh police officers. I would say, for the most part, it's been very positive. You've been very positive. I enjoyed hearing your philosophies. I liked your answers to most of the questions that we had today, and you'll have my support. So
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilwoman Warwick.
I was just say, I'll be working the pop stand the next 2 Saturdays, my son's baseball game. So with all your free time, you're welcome to come.
We're going to start this
Come hang out.
We're going to start this refs
Come
and
hang
ropes
out.
program where we train referees and cops together collectively.
Oh, cool.
Our young people in our city and our new officers. I think it's a perfect engagement in this space that I'm pretty qualified to teach.
Great.
So
Thank
look
you.
forward to it. It's going to be.
They can
it's gonna be a fun
referee a
time.
game between city council and county council.
These knees,
How's that?
these knees don't work the way they used to
I'll be
work.
the water person.
If I can do it walking, I might be able to be an active participant, but my knees aren't nearly as healthy as they used to be when I was 23.
Okay, I just have just a couple follow-ups and I'm done.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're going to put your nomination up for confirmation after a couple members want to continue conversation with you. So after they're done, we'll put it up. I'll talk to you about that. I'll let you know when we're going to put it up, okay? But I will say that briefly, I just want to ask you about how you allow the activists to have a voice in an audience with you, but yet not allow anyone, activists, residents that are not activists, political people. How do you take the politics out of policing is what I'm trying to ask. Because honestly, I think that's one of the biggest problems we face everywhere. You want people to be heard, even if they have a different opinion. You want everyone to be heard and everyone to feel valued. But at some point, it's going to be the public safety that takes top priority. And can you
So,
talk-
yeah, I think community has to have a voice, and the activist community has to have a voice and a seat at the table. When we talk about these community advisory groups, or I talk about the Chiefs Advisory Group, which we will start, there will be someone or members from the activist community that sit on this advisory board, because it's about that collective or that collaboration. It's also about the diversity of thought in the room. You know, we at times in policing can think very insular, very specific to maybe our value system, our expectations, and you don't have another input that can bring community expectations or communities' thought processes on a strategy. So I think if we own this collectively, then we've got to believe that everybody's voice matters. Obviously, I control the outcome. I control the end result of it. I'll own the successes and the failures. But when we want this collaboration, we want this with this all hands on deck engagement, then I can't mute voices that I disagree with. But I also can't allow those voices to be the loudest in the room to mute others that have valuable input as well. So it's a careful balance,
yeah.
right? And it takes a specific personality to be able to balance the room, so that at the end of the day, we all feel, one, we're heard, we have a voice, our voice matters, our voice has influence, and that we walk out of a room with the collective good for our community.
I think that's good. The only thing I would say is I hope that whoever you have as your advisor, people that live in the city of Pittsburgh.
I think
Okay.
that, again, when we talk about community, it's those that are living every day in this city with our police officers and our community members and our residents and our business stakeholders all the same. I think you have to have a vested interest in the city in which you live.
A vested interest. I think you have to have a residency in the city of Pittsburgh to tell you what you want our chief of police to do and our police department to do. So I'm really serious about that one. I'll probably go crazy otherwise.
I'm not even sure where that's
With
going,
that
because I
said,
don't.
can I have a motion to
Can I say
recess?
one last thing?
Yes.
I just think it's interesting that you see the representation from Southwest Pittsburgh here from beginning to end. And I just think it really speaks to the importance of how, the importance we place southwest of the river on public safety and the
We're going to
importance
move
of those to
Councilwoman
us.
Warwick over to southwest of the river.
We can do that if you want, but it is indicative. We've been here beginning to end, and and engaged in a thoughtful process, and it does speak to our commitment to having a safe and vibrant southwest of the river.
I do think that our area cares a lot about this issue. They vote that way, and a lot of times they just. We have a lot of officers that live in our district and their families and that kind of stuff. So I'll just say it's a big issue for us. And I think it's for everybody right now. Everybody in the city of Pittsburgh wants to feel safe, wants to feel safe. And we know you have in Lincoln Place, you have a lot of people too.
Yeah.
It used to be Police Central.
Yeah. But anyway, with that said, I'll let you know when I put the confirmation up for vote.
Okay, thank you.
It'll be
Thank you all.
short.
See ya.
Recess, motion to recess?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
To adjourn, motion to adjourn. We're going to recess again. So,
Second.
meeting's adjourned.